She is forced to marry a tyrant who killed her father for the throne. The girl invents a deadly game of survival with the Emperor where it is do or die for her. Subscribe to the channel right now and listen to this story with pleasure. Please like for my efforts. The Achelous Empire was renowned for its strong descendants, but only those who would surpass the others could rule it. Victory in a fierce struggle with his kin guaranteed the throne to one whose will was unbending. Of all the emperor's children, the youngest 13-year-old Ranieri, cruel and power-hungry, won. He wove the hair of his fallen kinsmen into a single braid, and dragging their bodies to the throne, pointed his sword at them. The emperor, flattered by his son's act, praised him enthusiastically, feeding his narcissism. But suddenly the boy plunged the blade into his father's chest. The emperor clutched at the hilt, holding back the bloody wheeze tearing from his throat, blood dripping onto his clothes. With an innocent but sinister smile, Ranieri said, "I am tired of waiting. I want to rule now. It makes me angry that someone is above me." Two men in solemn red outfits stood at the altar, and a priest recited vows of love. The girl under the crown realized that she had been sold to a ruthless emperor. She looked up at the priest. A translucent veil hid her pink hair. The priest frowned, waiting for an answer. The girl, hesitating, uttered, "I agree." Ranieri looked at her coldly, annoyed at her confusion. He tossed it quietly. "Shall we continue before I change my mind?" After Ranieri's threatening words, the priest loudly asks the newlyweds to exchange rings to seal each other's bonds of love forever. Slender fingers reaching for the ring, they trembled slightly, for just a small misstep could be a girl's last in her life. She looked at the ring anxiously. She should drop it, and her life would be cut short. Shyly placing the ring on the emperor's finger, she heard the priest's words. It was time to seal the vow with a kiss. The girl closed her eyes in preparation for the kiss, but when the emperor threw back the veil, he did not approach. She froze, not understanding why he was delaying. Opening her eyes, she looked at the emperor in surprise. When she saw his face, she opened her eyes even wider, unable to hide her confusion. Ranieri looked down, his face calm and detached. Suddenly he looked up, his red eyes shining with arrogance. Smiling, he said, "Finally." She didn't understand exactly what he meant, or why he said it with such a haughty grin. He abruptly wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her to him, making her flinch. Leaning toward his wife's face, he said coldly, "If you had delayed a little longer, I would have died of boredom." He kissed her, and she realized this was not her old life. She was now the wife of a tyrant emperor in a foreign world. Serafina was called Blossom, a pure, bright, unearthly beauty of a girl. Achelous was the Abyss, an empire ruled by a power-hungry emperor. During the march, Ranieri met Serafina at the entrance to the temple. In her bright eyes, he saw his own cruelty and lust for blood. He loved her and hated her. He wanted to break her soul, but she remained pure, shining even brighter. With sword in hand, he was seized with a mad desire to possess her. Before her eyes, he killed her beloved paladin of Eden, so Serafina lost everything. Although there were many characters in this story, the main character was the least known. In Achelous, one cannot marry while one's spouse is alive. Therefore, after kidnapping Serafina, the emperor first executed his wife. She lost her former life. She was killed by her own husband after choosing someone else. She was shocked. She turned out not to be a heroine, but an unnoticeable minor figure. Looking under her feet, she pondered, "Aren't villains usually fixed to save the plot?" She still stood there in her white dress, unable to accept that she had become a nobody. Frowning, she began to think, how could she change the course of history and save herself? She imagined what would have happened if she had been here earlier and been able to change events. She even pondered, what if she tried to tame the young emperor? But she soon realized, Ranieri is not someone who can be fixed. With irony, she thought, maybe I'd try it if I had 9 lives, but not now. The girl sees only one version of events that could unfold now, to live as if she were already dead. After the wedding, Ranieri showed no interest in his wife, and she cautiously began to express her displeasure, hoping for attention. But her constant reminders quickly bored the emperor, and as soon as he brought Serafina to the palace, he got rid of his wife. Clenching her fist, the girl made up her mind. On the day of Ranieri's visit to the temple, she would pretend to be dead and run away to survive. She walked across the room, confident that the emperor would not verify her death. After all, he needed the old empress to disappear for the new one. Suddenly she stopped and covered her face with her hands, surprised by the sudden thought. Her eyes sparkled. For the first time in a long time, she believed her plan was perfect. Closing her eyes in euphoria, she didn't notice when Ranieri was right in front of her and spoke. "Empress." She recoiled sharply, covered her mouth with her palms, and oohed fearfully. The emperor immediately accused her of ignoring him. Stuttering embarrassedly, she asked again, "What?" But he repeated the rebuke. Fright and shame flashed across her face. She realized the situation was out of control. Looking at the frowning emperor, she mentally repeated that everything had gone wrong. He asked, "Why are you avoiding me?" She tried to excuse herself, stepped forward, but got tangled in the hem of her dress. Falling to his feet, she nearly collapsed in shame, mentally berating herself. Looking down at the floor, she remembered how much the emperor hated procrastination. Even Serafina had been punished for slowness, not to mention the servants. Kneeling, she remembered his rule of answering quickly, accurately, and without further ado. "Lift your head," Ranieri said, stepping on her dress with the toe of his shoe. He looked at her with a haughty grin, giving her a rare chance to explain herself. Clenching her fists and clenching her eyes, she tried to come up with a plausible lie. Finally, loudly proclaimed some sort of illness that caused her to be able to pass out with her eyes open. He squinted his eyes and grinned. "You're yelling at me now too?" She repeated her explanation quietly, but he said there was no mention of such an affliction in the letters from Unro. Smiling with panic, she turned away. Fainting spells are rare. Still kneeling, she began to praise the emperor, saying that her weakness was probably due to his greatness. It was difficult for her to endure the presence of such a powerful man. He nodded, as if agreeing with her words about his greatness, but you could feel the mockery in his voice. Ranieri pressed his foot harder against her dress, scrolling down her sock, as if to remind her where she belonged. She continued to stare at him in amazement as he uttered, "So it's my fault?" Leaning against the cold marble, she lowered her head, mentally chiding herself for her naive hopes. She compared it to the sun, bright and relentless, which is painful to look at, but no one blames the sun itself. Ranieri watched her silently from top to bottom, not expressing an ounce of emotion. She tried not to show fear, but she wished with all her heart that he would just go away, because he got what he came for. In the back of her mind, she was glad. He hadn't exposed his sword yet. It gave a faint but hopeful hope. "Are you going to avoid my gaze for the rest of your life just so you don't faint?" he asked. The girl nodded, and added quietly that she would be happy if he would allow it. Hearing his authorization, she opened her eyes in surprise. But immediately she was confused, not understanding exactly what he meant. Gathering herself, she decided to look up. Procrastination could cost her too much. When she did, she saw him drop to one knee and say, "Well done." She was stunned, pressing her lips together and widening her eyes in surprise. The emperor said with a smile that he wasn't bored now, and she tried to remain calm despite her inner panic. The shock never left her. She was sure he'd be angry, but it turned out differently. He praised her for her submission and humility, calling her a worthy empress, ready to submit without argument. Ranieri touched her neck, squeezing lightly. He allowed her to ask any question she wanted, promising an honest answer, but she had time to think that a careless question might cost her too much. Gathering her strength, she looked up at him anxiously and asked, "Why was I chosen?" Ranieri tightened his grip sharply on her neck. There was a look of disappointment on his face. He had expected a more pointed question, not a trivial one about choosing a wife. Looking down from above, he said, "Answering this is a bore to death." She lowered her gaze, not daring to look him in the eye. She knew it could all come crashing down now. Suddenly, he pulled back, removed his hand, and spoke, "You're lucky. I promised to spare you." She breathed heavily, head down, while Ranieri, with his back to her, told her how, after the announcement of the wedding, he had been sent dozens of portraits of the daughters of the nobility from all over. Spreading his hands, he noted that there were so many portraits that the entire palace could be draped with them. Turning around, he grinned and squinted his eyes to tell her that he had ordered the portraits to be hung in his room. Then he asked his wife why she thought he had done it. The girl was frightened and suggested that he wanted to choose the prettiest one, but Ranieri immediately denied it. He was not interested in beauty. He explained that all people were the same to him. Meanwhile, she was lost in thought, admiring his appearance. Waking up, she opened her eyes in surprise. She noticed a crack on one of the walls, and immediately wanted to know where it came from. The girl looked at Ranieri sitting nearby. He raised his hand and pointed at the wall. The crack was from his dagger. The weapon stabbed right into the portrait with her image on it. Ranieri pointed to the left eye in the portrait and noticed that the dagger had pierced through it. The girl was confused, not knowing what to say. She turned pale, and he laughed, saying that the sight amused him. She turned pale, and he laughed, saying it amused him. As he left, he still threw in her direction, "But you could be more cheerful. I'll rest." She mentally went over his words, remembering how he had praised her for her malleability and called her the perfect spouse. Halfway there, he stopped and asked what his wife's name was. He still didn't know her name. Without getting up from her knees, she hesitated for a moment and called herself Angelica. When he inquired what her loved ones called her, she replied, Angie. He touched her chin with the toe of his shoe, lifting her face, and repeated the name. Looking at her without emotion, he uttered, Keep it up. The aura in the room became unsettling. Ranieri, still holding her face, thought that one day she would bore him and he would get rid of her. Knowing nothing of his thoughts, Angie smiled naively as she looked at him. Turning sideways, he said briefly, All right, and left the hall. She remained seated on the floor, hugging her knees, leaned back and lay down on the cold marble, exhaling heavily. Her disheveled hair spread across the floor, and looking up at the ceiling, she whispered, I survived. The name of the Empress was not mentioned in the novel. Perhaps Angelica is not her real name, but she had no other option. In the book, the Empress was killed shortly after the wedding, but I think another one was mentioned, the fifth. Lying on the floor, she thanked fate that the ceremony had been peaceful, and hoped that everything would be the same from now on. Angelica stirred in her sleep, frowning her eyebrows slightly and pursing her lips. Suddenly, Ranieri leans over her and says that she is restless in her sleep. He begins to count to 3. The girl sat up abruptly in bed, clutching the blanket to herself. Her eyes reflected fear and confusion. Why is he still here? Popped into my head. The Emperor looked at her expressionlessly and said quietly, Didn't want to go to his place. Angie recoiled, covering her mouth with her palms. She thought she'd said it out loud. He leaned closer, touched her chin, and said that even a fool would have realized what she was thinking right now by looking at her face. Grinning, he reminded her that she was up too late, later than 9. Angie looked at him in bewilderment and didn't understand why no one had woken her up. Ranieri stood up, threw on his robe, and tossing it over his shoulder, repeated that he was bored with her. Angie sighed heavily, remembering how yesterday he had praised her for being docile, and now he was saying the exact opposite. At that moment, one of the maids called out to her. The woman offered her a bath. Angie lay in the warm water, while behind her back, a maid helped with the grooming. The girl couldn't stop thinking about the sudden change in the Emperor's demeanor. At the same time, she recalled again her escape plan to avoid the fate from the novel. Angelica asked the maid for the date. She brushed her hair and answered, May 19th. Remembering that in the book, Ranieri met Serafina in the winter at Tunya's temple, Angie realized she still had 7 more months to get in. All that the girl remembered about her heroine of the novel was only her name, but in time Angelica's memories were completely transferred. Angelica was the second princess of the kingdom of Unro. The princess had an older brother, an older sister, and a younger brother whom she loved very much. Since Angelica was a member of the royal family, it is very likely that she learned the basics of geography and history. Angie decides to use the knowledge to her advantage to cross the empire's border and escape her oppressive husband. It didn't matter to the Empress where to run, weak or strong country, but she knows that eventually the Actolus Empire will end. If Ranieri decides to go down the path of disaster with Serafina by killing the Knight Eden, then the empire that has hung on to its monarch will fall into oblivion. Angelica had set an important goal for herself, to survive whatever it takes. And the Empress was approached by a maid with a cart framed in gold, on which was a silver tray with engravings on which was breakfast for her mistress. The maid set plates of delicious-smelling food on the table. The Empress wondered if she could eat in her room with such pleasure and comfort. Angie watched the maids, amazed at their professionalism. No attempts at intimacy, no superfluous words, just the precise fulfillment of their duties. She noted that they kept the right distance and decided not to seek contact with them. It would only make escape more difficult in the future. Angelica decides to act cold-bloodedly toward the maids. Looking up at the girl next to the table, the Empress inquires about their names, for she did not know them until now. The first to introduce herself was a woman who was always dressed in a purple cape. She replied, I am the mother of the Marquis Jacques. A fair-haired girl came forward, calling herself Miran. She was Count Luck's wife. Angie looked at the servants with slight displeasure, thinking in her mind that they were all from different famous families. The Empress picked up on the fact that she didn't feel very comfortable being in such company, not yet able to explain the feeling to herself. The Empress asks her maids to accompany her in the palace until she gets used to it, because now everything was new and unfamiliar to her. Angelica will stop by to ask the Marquise if the Empress has any plans for today. Smiling at her mistress, The Marquise replies that today will be a free day and there are no social important meetings to attend. Angelica was surprised, but decided that she would make today a little entrance for herself, one in which she could indulge. After all, there were still 7 months to go. Nothing would happen if she missed a day. The next day, history repeats itself. The Empress is told that she again has nothing planned for today and can rest. A day later, the same story again, and so it went on for several days in succession. Every day, there were no plans or even meetings with anyone for the Empress. Angelica finally realizes what has been plaguing her every day. The maids did not allow the Empress to work. Common sense suggested Angelica that she was not going to demand much. Friendship with rich, honorable people, approval of the budget of the palace, checking the various departments. Angie realizes that she must first familiarize herself with the materials of the last year, and only then she can get to work. But she wonders if it is not the maid's job to inform the Empress of such matters. Angelique understands why the maids are real professionals. They are polite and discreet, but if Angelique is the first to speak of the problem, she may be considered strange. The girl was beginning to get annoyed that everyone in the palace didn't perceive her falsely. She lay on the bed with thoughts of doing something about this situation. Cicienne, Empress Angelica's maid, was surprised that her mistress was marrying Emperor Actilus, for everyone knew what a tyrant and despot he was. She did not want to believe what was happening, worried about her mistress. Over tea, Angie gazed at the porcelain cup framed in gold and pondered. She called one of the maids from the palace of the Actilus Empire over to her. An older woman approached Angie, saying kindly, "Please ask." Angelica mentions that she brought a maid with her. She asks the Marquise where Cicienne has gotten to. The Marquise replies that in order to become a maid in the palace of Emperor Actilus, one must retake special training. Raising a surprised glance at the maid, Angie asks her why no one has said anything about Cicionne's training. The maid stopped. The hall fell into a sepulchral silence. It was obvious that the woman was confused, not finding the words to answer the Empress's question. In her mind, Angie thinks that if she were Ranieri, she would have been answered without delay. But soon she says that she is not against Cicionne's training, but she is the mistress of her maid, and should have been informed about it so that there would be no misunderstandings. Angelica asks the maid to bring Cicienne to at least take a look at her. Leaning her hand against her cheek, the Marquise replies that she thought the Empress knew about Cicionne's training, so no one said anything to her about it. In her thoughts, the Empress noticed that the maid was very cunning. She assumed that the woman wanted to fight her. Suddenly, for the Marquise, Angelica smiled and apologized. The young mistress thought that if she apologized first, the maid would have nothing to say, because she was fed by her own pride. A tense atmosphere hangs in the room after her apology, but Angelica asks the maid again about Cicienne. A woman's strong hand strikes a porcelain cup with beautiful blue patterns against the table with the bottom, splashing water on her hand and the table. She is outraged by the Empress's behavior, comparing her to a monster. A guy stands in front of a woman in a purple cape, asking her to stop fidgeting and calm down. It was the same guy, the son of the maid Jacques. He wished to find out from his mother what really happened and what she was so angry about. She told her son that the Empress wanted to fight them and rebuked him that the Empress was only from a small country and she did not know her place. A girl with white hair and bright green eyes enters the room. Her name was Sylvia. She was the sister of the Marquis Jacques. She asks what is wrong. The Marquise admits the idea that if her daughter became Empress, she wouldn't have to worry so much. Never and no one objected to Sylvia being the one to become the wife of Emperor Ranieri. Many people lined up to please them, for they knew that they had nominated a contender to be the emperor's wife. One empress became none other than Angelica, the other a princess of the kingdom of Unro. The maid said that she was sorry that her daughter had wasted her years waiting for the emperor's approval, but she still didn't understand why the girl who was lucky enough to become empress was looking at Sylvia with a frightened gaze. The white-haired girl sits down in front of her mother, asking her not to say that about the girl chosen by the emperor. Sylvia turns to her brother, wishing he would intervene in the conversation and help calm her mother down. The mother of the Marquis Robert admits the idea that the Empress, who is nothing of herself, has excellent skills in bed, since the Emperor decided to choose her, to which Sylvia, a little angry, asks her mother to be careful with the words. Roberta only pushes Sylvia's hand away, screaming that she doesn't even want to hear it. Unable to contain her emotions, Marquis and Sylvia's mother starts yelling even more at Sylvia that her value has just dropped. Sylvia, sitting on the floor, looks at her furious mother with a look of horror on her face as she screams that everything is useless. Unable to bear it, Sylvia runs out of the room in tears, with her brother Marquis watching her. Marquis Jacques, turning to his mother, pronounces, "Mother, don't worry. His Majesty does not visit the Empress after midnight, does he?" With a sly smile, Marquis says, "I am the Deputy Minister and Marquis. The Emperor has no interest in her. If we find an excuse, he will destroy her himself." Without stopping his speech, the Marquis continues to tell his mother, "You know his character. Mother, all we need is an excuse." Roberta smirks evilly, mulling over her son's words. Still with the same smirk, she utters, "This woman definitely has many flaws. We need to find the right time and inform His Majesty about it." Henry Marquis Jacques bows slightly to his mother, laying his hand on her chest, replying, "Yes, mother." Henry's mind is spinning with thoughts that even the Emperor makes a decision out of personal gain and that he has one principle that he adheres to. The Marquis thinks things over, knowing full well that anything that harms the country must be removed immediately, so they need to make a plan. But the man's gaze is directed to the side. A thought flashes through Henry Jacques' mind. It is time to approve the budget, and only the Emperor and Empress have the authority to do so. But Her Majesty is not at all doing what she should be doing. The Marquis smirks maliciously, already forming a plan. The Empress only goes around looking for a maid, and everyone realizes that these are only obstacles to the prosperity of Actilus. The few days after Sishin's return passed quietly. The thought flashed through the Empress's mind that Sizian really does know Angelica well. Meanwhile, the abuse from Marquis Jacques' mother continued. The Empress chose to ignore them completely to avoid conflict. But that wasn't the only problem. If only she had noticed it then it would not have happened that she was now sitting in front of the Emperor in front of her. Angelica's mind flashed. The Emperor has summoned me. The culprit is probably one of the maids. But who? Since everything led up to this, Angelica decided to bow as low as possible to the Emperor. To which the Emperor looked at her with his cold gaze and replied, "The Empress is bowing her head without even realizing what has happened." The Emperor asked if she had any problems with her legs, to which he received the reply, "They're weak, but it's not a problem." Snapping his fingers, Ranieri uttered, "Really? Then let's continue." Deputy Minister Marquis Jacques bowed his head to the Emperor. "Your Majesty, I have prepared the budget for the third quarter, but there is a problem with the distribution for Her Majesty's palace." Angie looked at Henry with incomprehension. A thought flashed through her mind as to what budget he was even talking about. To which the Emperor, looking at the Marquis, replied, "I did not ask anything, only gave the order to proceed, Deputy Minister. I did not ask for an answer." With a slight smile, Ranieri continued, "The Empress is bold. She has a lot of nerve. What were they thinking when they approved such a large budget?" Trying to blame Angie, Marquis Jacques replied to Ranieri, "Your Majesty, the Empress indulged in amusements instead of taking care of the palace." Angie looked at Henry Jacques in surprise, for she didn't know what he was talking about. Angie realized why she wasn't asked to do business after Marquis's words. Since she had no intention of performing her duties, it was the officials who set the cost of her work. Without subsiding for a moment, the Marquis Jacques continued to accuse the Empress. Besides, the entertainment expenses amount to an unimaginable sum. The ministers have turned a blind eye, but I cannot. Angie drops her frightened face to the floor. Everything he says is a lie, but she has no chance to object. All the time she was being bullied by all the maids. Only Sissin was taking her side. The Emperor looked at the Marquis with a cold expression. "And what are you going to do?" The Marquis, still trying to remain innocent, began to prove that he had no agenda. Glancing at the Emperor, he continued, "I just want the truth to be known, given the loyalty to the imperial family, but the decision is yours, Your Majesty." After everything the Emperor heard, his face only became gloomier. "A decision for me to make, on such and such an occasion?" Bowing to the Emperor, the Deputy Minister replied, "Your Majesty, this is an important matter. I need your decision." Silence hung in the hall, waiting to see what the Emperor would say. Angie, knowing how much Ranieri cares about the country, realizes that the situation is very dangerous. For the Emperor, the boring one will turn out to be guilty, and the cheerful one uninvolved. He will think that the Empress is actually careless, but this problem can only be solved by revising the budget. Angelica looks at Henry and Roberta with an angry look. She knows that trying in this boring way will get them nowhere. "Don't they know what kind of man he is?" flashes through the Empress's mind. The girl bites her lips slightly tensely, thinking, "Am I the only one who knows what's on his mind?" Nervously, she glances at the others. The servants think Ranieri is among the cruel people, she thinks. But they are under illusions that he doesn't care about the country. Angelica's mind spins. Looking at the Emperor, she says in her mind, his gaze reads, "I'll be angry if you don't show me something interesting." After gathering her thoughts, Angie said, "Your Majesty, I have behaved immorally and impudently. Laying her hand on her chest, she continues, I should have discussed the budget with you. I apologize and offer some entertainment to lift your spirits. With a satisfied and maddened smile, Ranieri looks at her, asking, And what do you suggest? Rising from her knees, she confidently pronounces the manhunt. Looking directly at him, with a confident voice, she says repeatedly, There will be a manhunt. The Marquis Jacques and his mother looked at the Empress with bewilderment. With a smirk on her face, the Empress continues, Pray, the three of us. The Emperor looks at her contentedly, telling her to continue. Obediently obeying the Emperor, she continues, All the inhabitants of Actilus are descendants of Actilla, the god of war. I hear anyone can become a soldier with skill. Confident in her words, she looks at the Emperor and says, The perfect prey for this type of entertainment. Satisfied with these developments, the Emperor answers her plainly. Manhunting is a method from the original work. Angelica knew he'd be interested in such a thing, but realizing that she too will have to be prey, she decides to go all in. With an innocent expression, she utters, I have an illness, however, for I have only recently arrived at Actilus. Angie, without wasting a second, continues, Is it fun to let a sick rabbit out on the hunting grounds? Looking away, the Emperor asks, Are you not going to participate? The Empress shouted, How could you think such a thing? With a confident face, she utters, That's part of it for me, your majesty. While the Marquis and his mother stare at her in amazement, she continues, By winter, I will be a worthy prey, so please postpone the hunt for Angelica for a while. When Angie bowed, Marquis looked at her, calling it absurd. Angie, knowing she would, replied, Marquis Jacques, come to your senses. She looked at him with a hard stare. Do you care that much about validity? Without thinking for a second, she continued, The same goes for the budget problem. If you had understood me right away, you wouldn't have had to bother His Majesty. Angie looked thoughtfully at Marquis, to make up for his precious time. Abruptly, her expression changed to a sly smirk. We should be worthy prey. After the Empress's words, clapping from the Emperor was heard. The Emperor looked at her with a satisfied smile. Quite good for our Empress. To which the Marquis Jacques looked fearfully at the floor. Your Majesty, how can you make my old mother do such a cruel thing? Please punish me. To which the Emperor only hummed cheerfully. Cruel? How can you say such a thing? When the Emperor spoke his last words, the faces of Marquis Jacques and his mother were covered with horror. Did you not hear the Empress? You are honored to be my prey. Shouting Your Majesty, they were immediately interrupted by the Emperor. Just as the Empress said, Aren't you three the culprits? The Empress stood in a stupor as the Marquis Jacques shouted that she was stupid. At the shouts of the Marquis and his mother, the soldiers seized them, leading them away. Angie looked at them. She knew Ranieri was aware of Marquis' attitude toward him. The younger Sylvia had not been chosen to be Empress, and he knew that would be the case, yet Ranieri did nothing about it. Without noticing the approaching Emperor, she was still immersed in her thoughts. What if Sylvia became Empress? The Emperor placed a finger under her chin, ordering her to raise her head. When Angie lifted her head, he grabbed her chin, speaking in a low voice. Suddenly, the Emperor leaned his lips against his wife's lips, who had not expected it in any way. The Emperor pulled back, uttering, You're never wrong. To which she looked at him a little nervously, thinking in her mind, You bet, one more mistake and I'm gone. Lifting Angie in his arms, Emperor asked her how long she was going to run. When he threw her on the throne and pressed her against it, she said nervously, This place is your throne. From which he glanced down at her small form, smirking. With some teasing, the Emperor uttered, This throne is too big for such a little girl. Suddenly he put his hand on her head, which made her a little surprised. Unable to bear it, she blushed at such actions. Ranieri began stroking Angelica's head, smiling. Do you like it? A little embarrassed, she lied to him. Yes, Your Majesty, I like it very much. The next day, there were changes at the Empress Castle. Because Marquis Jacques became prey, his mother was forced to resign as headmaid. For the imperial maids, the space that had been vacated had become a total burden. But that post was taken by the maid Sicien. Angie turned to Sicien with a friendly smile, her voice sounding warm and sincere. No one wanted to take on this position, and she was grateful for her courage and determination. Sicien smoothly bowed to the Empress and replied with a slight sadness, It's fine, but only I was treated like an outsider. Relief flashed through Angelica's mind. It was a good thing Sicien hadn't noticed anything. With the change of headmaid, rumors spread. The Empress was no longer looked down upon. A golden-haired maid approaches the Empress, asking what colors she likes. To which the Empress replies with a slight smile that she's not picky, but she would be fine with yellow like her current dress. After the maid ran away, The thought flashed through Angie's mind that she is only a reader, that she knows the plot of the novella. Still immersed in her thoughts, the girl felt a tightness inside, for surely the rumors about the Marquis had already spread. Amidst the rumors that have circulated, after this whole situation, Angie's social circle began to regard her as a fiery and arrogant empress. At first, this did not bother Angelique at all. After all, Angie was just fulfilling her duties as empress, and it had been a remarkably hard day. There was a look of tension on Angelica's face. She was beginning to think she was in trouble. Sitting over the papers with a fountain pen, she reflected that the duties of an empress were far more complicated than she had realized. But Sicien said that the empress wasn't used to life here yet. Since Angie had been in the empress's body, she had yet to fulfill the potential bestowed upon her. Landscape planning and garden control, salons and ball audits, also Solstice Day, which is the main holiday in Actilus. Walking along the balcony behind the empress were her maids, the symbol of the past life of the deity. Actila is the sun. As the empress realized, this festival is held on the Solstice Day. But suddenly, something caught the empress's attention. She stopped and looked down. A girl with white blonde hair stood below. Asking the question, "Who is this?" the empress glanced at Sicien, who started to speak but fell silent. Unable to stand it, Angie asked with a serious look, "Are you going to keep quiet like that?" A little hesitatingly, Sicien replied, "This is Sylvia Jacques, sister of the Marquis Jacques." Surprised, she questioned, "What's Sylvia doing here?" To which the empress received a reply from the maid Sicien that Sylvia was requesting an audience with Her Majesty, the Empress. Angelica glanced curiously back down at Sylvia, to which Sylvia, noticing the empress's gaze, immediately looked at her and bowed. Narrowing her eyebrows, the empress couldn't understand why Sylvia had only come now, even though enough time had passed since the emperor's decision. Why did she only come now? A thought flashed through her mind. Sicien replied that Sylvia had requested an audience the day after the verdict. The empress was surprised. A girl has been waiting without food or bath for 5 days? Taking pity, the empress ordered Sylvia to be let in. As she approached Sylvia, she was already sitting on her knees in front of her. Placing her hand on her chest, she introduced herself. "I am Roberta Jacques' daughter, Roberta Jacques, Henri Jacques' younger sister, Sylvia Jacques." Looking at her with a calm gaze, Angelica replied, "It's too late." The empress continued speaking while looking at Sylvia, who was still sitting. "I'm sorry you had to be here for whole days, but if you wanted to ask for leniency leave." Looking down at the floor, Sylvia replied to Angie, "Not at all. Everyone reaps what they sow." Angelica looked at her with a look of incomprehension. Wasn't that what the girl had come here for? Clutching her dress with her hand, Sylvia shouted to her, "The moment my mother left her position as Her Majesty's headmaid, I realized that this was my chance." Sylvia begged that the Empress would let her be her maid instead of her lying mother. Sylvia was still sitting on the floor in front of the Empress. The Empress looked at her in bewilderment. "The daughter of my enemy, and she wants to serve me?" Not trusting the girl, Angie couldn't help but wonder if she was just trying to find an opportunity for revenge. Looking at Sylvia with a tense look, she finally said, "You realize that this is not the time for me to entrust you with such a job?" Sylvia, without rising from the floor, nodded quietly. "I see." She tried to keep her emotions under control, but they were bursting out. On the outside, the Empress remained calm, but on the inside, she found it increasingly difficult to keep her cool, especially when she noticed how Sylvia began to tremble. With uncertainty in her gaze and a tremor in her voice, Sylvia uttered, "What other intentions could I possibly have?" Sylvia talked about her past, how she was prepared from childhood to become the Emperor's consort, and at the same time, a servant for the Empress. Tears ran down her cheeks as she recounted her bitter fate. "And now that my family has become prey, I have nowhere to go." Sylvia was the daughter of a fallen aristocratic family. Now she was really left with nothing. Raising tearful eyes to Angie, she whispered, "It hurts me to think about my family." In her mind, she went through all the memories, good and bad. Despite the way they treated me, they are my family. Unable to stand it, Sylvia snapped, "More than anything, I just want to survive." Angie lowered her gaze to her. There was an empty desperation in her eyes. She wanted to survive, too. Later, lying on her bed, Angelica replayed the day's events in her head. Suddenly, a thought flashed through her mind. Ranieri wouldn't even be touched. Although Sylvia had touched something inside her, it was too early to trust her. Who knows what was on her mind? Putting on her pink slippers, Angie got out of bed and headed for the balcony. She stepped out onto the balcony. The wind ruffled her pink curls. Angelica flinched as she felt someone else's touch on her shoulder and shifted her gaze to her hand. Turning her head, she saw Ranieri and was startled by the sudden appearance. Angie sat down on the railing, and the Emperor stepped closer. Squealing at night, another one of your chronic illnesses? When she asked him what he was doing here, he only put his hand on the railing, stepping closer. Bringing his face close, he uttered, "Do I have to have a reason?" Angie raised an eyebrow, thinking if he came so often it would be a problem. A familiar smirk appeared on his face. "Seems like a good time to visit, doesn't it?" Stuttering slightly, she replied, "I hope you're not here out of a sense of duty." He raised an eyebrow, his scarlet eyes piercing her. "Honey, have you started stuttering?" Ranieri took her cheek and moved even closer. What a shame. Without letting her say a word, he leaned down and nestled his lips against hers. Pulling away, he asked, "Should I stop?" Embarrassed, with a blush on her cheeks, Angie thanked him for stopping. Straightening his back, Ranieri looked at his wife. "Did the day go well?" With a nervous smile, she turned the question to him, "And how is your Majesty's?" With evident pleasure, he narrated how he had amused himself. The hunters had already begun their training. Suddenly, the Emperor added, "I have introduced 2 new rules. Do you want to know?" Ranieri told, now the prey would also have weapons. If they can survive 3 hours, they will be free. With a teasing smile, he added, "By the way, I didn't consult." Bringing his face closer to her lips, he whispered, "You're not upset." To which she replied to her husband that everything was fine, trying not to give away her inner turmoil. The Emperor asked again how Angie had spent the day, for she had never answered. She replied that she had been busy with her reports, but there was a flicker of excitement in her gaze. "Really?" Ranieri didn't let her finish, cutting her off abruptly. "Bring her." The Emperor grinned as if amused. "This should be fun." The Empress looked at him in amazement, not understanding what exactly he found amusing. Leaning closer again, he whispered, "If she takes part in the game as a hunter," almost touching his forehead to hers, Ranieri pointed a finger at the flushed Empress. "Isn't this supposed to right the wrongs of the past and prove her loyalty?" The Empress, shocked by his words, turned to the Emperor. "Do you want her to kill her mother and brother with her own hands?" Ranieri turned away, heading towards his chambers. "Isn't that a great idea?" Entering the room, he leisurely began to pour wine into glasses, saying in passing that she was wondering if Sylvia would hurt her. The anxieties of ordinary people seemed too primitive, almost pathetic, to the Emperor. Pouring wine into a glass, he pronounced, "Bring Sylvia Jacques, my dear. If she does well as a hunter, she will be appointed to the position of maid." The Empress nodded in response, agreeing with an uncertain expression on her face. Ranieri's face immediately changed. "I thought it was a good idea, but what's with the look on his face?" He raised his glass as if to set the mark. "Then I will give the order to Sylvia Jacques." The Emperor grinned, a sneer in his voice. "It must be painful for you to even speak, for you are so weak." A bitter truth flashed through the Empress's mind. By his standards, there are only weaklings in this world. Ranieri was born in the body of a man, but he considered himself a deity and the rest of us gnats crawling under his feet. He couldn't help but become violent. Even if his childhood wasn't miserable, Ranieri was born being evil. Suddenly, the Emperor poured wine on the Empress, a red stream sliding down her dress. He grinned. "You're scared. You need to immerse yourself in pleasure and forget about fear." Angie blushed at her husband's actions. He is evil incarnate, but at the same time stronger and more beautiful than anyone she has ever known. Suddenly, he abruptly grabbed her arm and dragged her behind him. The Emperor toppled the girl onto the bed, looming over her like a shadow over the sun. After a while, they were lying on the bed under the covers. Angie was turned sideways, as if hiding from him, and he was looking at her without taking his eyes off her. He leaned on his arm. "You're quite weak." Poking Angelica in the shoulder, he grinned and added that she was also petite. Smiling, he took his finger off her shoulder and ran it through her hair, lightly, as if playing. Angie's face changed. There was anxiety in it. She had completely forgotten that she was to be the Emperor's prey this winter. In fact, the Empress had no intention of becoming anyone's prey. The girl hopes to wait until winter, when Ranieri will leave on an expedition and meet Seraphima, then he will not look for her. Lifting up, the Emperor looked at his wife. "By the way, I never told you about the second rule. You must also become a hunter." Angelica, covering herself with the blanket, pulled herself up as well. "Your Majesty, I am not good enough to take on this task." Ranieri looked at her with a smile. "Nothing to worry about. The game won't do you any harm, but that's the rule." She looked at him excitedly. "No, Ranieri, the hunter?" A thought flashed through the girl's mind. Sylvia wouldn't stand to meet such evil, and would take her along the way too, so she wouldn't be bored along the way. Ranieri knew the rules were meaningless. He added them knowing everything. She glanced at the Emperor. When is the hunt taking place? I have not heard of a date for it. Ranieri smirked and cast a glance at the Empress. We'll open it on the summer solstice. You'll probably be very busy. The Empress looked back at him with slight trepidation in her eyes. This event was only a month away. Angie originally sought to form friendships with the nobles, but all Soviet activities were suddenly cancelled. Roberta Jacques and Henry Jacques, as if not feeling tired, were busily preparing for the event. Angie watched through the small gridded window as they practiced with honed concentration. Angelica was allowed to watch the training, which is why she's there now, thinking, these two are really talented. All the people of Actilis, including women and children, studied martial arts so that they would be ready to join the war at a moment's notice. Duchess Nirma, Angie's maid, turned to the Empress. It is said that you originally neglected training, but things changed after His Highness's visit to you yesterday. Angie cast a tense look at her. She was sure Nirma knew about the two rules. The maid pronounced that they were now looking for the best teacher, but whatever he might be, in 1 month's time. The Empress turned to Maid Nirma. I need to learn how to use a bow. Angie continued. I'll fight in close combat, I'll lose. I have to keep my distance. I need to control the situation from afar. The Empress took her hands in hers. Teach me how to use the bow so I can last as long as possible. Time passed, and she began practicing. Exhausted, she collapsed to the ground. The bow was much heavier than Angie had imagined. Nirma looked at the Empress. Your Majesty, forgive me for speaking, but... The maid continued. I've never heard of anyone having such a hard time holding it, not even a 10-year-old child. Without thinking, Angie stood up. Got it. Let's try again. Holding the bow in her hands, Angelica realized she was different from the people of Actilis. Their bodies were strong, their strength great, unlike hers. Angie stared at the target, once again hoping to hit it at least today. She took aim, focusing her gaze on the circle in front of her, no longer hoping to hit the very center. The Empress released an arrow, coldly and accurately aiming it at the heart of the target. The Emperor sat on his throne, majestic and motionless. In front of him, kneeling on his knees, sat Sylvia. He looked down at her and asked, I heard that you want to become the Empress handmaiden. Do you even realize the position you're putting yourself in? Sylvia replied with slight nervousness that she understood. Ranieri said there was one condition. Sylvia, as if hearing a chance, said with hope in her voice, Then if I fulfill it. But the Emperor interrupted her, coldly tossing her off. Become a hunter! Her face contorted with horror. Ranieri leaned back lazily on the back of his throne and, without showing the slightest bit of interest, replied, Expected reaction. Uninterested. He told the guards to take her away, and the guards grabbed Sylvia. She tried to object, but they had already taken her away. With the same indifference, Ranieri asked a servant standing nearby what about the Empress, to which he received the reply that all arrangements had been cancelled. The Emperor squinted, not a single note trembling in his voice, and... The servant, still kneeling, replied uncertainly, I think she's trying to learn archery. Ranieri grinned, almost mockingly. What a cowardly man! The servant shivered uncomfortably, but still added, However, the Empress fainted. The phrase made the Emperor tense up. With contempt and sternness in his eyes, he asked sharply, What does that even mean? Angie came to her senses. The room was flooded with sunlight, and warm rays fell on her face. She thought confusedly, This is a bed? Did I faint at practice? She tried to rise, and at the same moment a sharp pain shot through her shoulders. She should have listened to the Duchess, she thought with annoyance. Looking down, the Empress said aloud, So I've been weak since childhood? And a voice came from her side. Why do you talk like you don't remember anything from your childhood? Angie flinched in surprise. Her heart felt like it was bouncing in her chest. Your Majesty, why did you appear so suddenly? She replied with slight nervousness, lowering her gaze. About what happened yesterday. The Emperor looked at her, the corners of his lips curving into a slight smile. I have been relayed that you have passed out. He slowly lifted her chin with his hand, his voice a little softer. I figured something terrible had happened. With a note of teasing sarcasm, Ranieri uttered, I never thought you'd faint on the training ground. The Emperor looked at her more closely, and concern slipped into his voice for a moment. You're still quite pale. Angie blushed slightly, pressing her hand to her chest. Is it from the pain? Or is her body shaking for some other reason? She thought. Sliding her gaze over his face, she nervously wondered when he would finally leave. She just wanted some peace. Ranieri caught her gaze and looked at her questioningly, as if reading her mind. He suddenly frowned, a reproach in his voice, like a father reprimanding a stubborn child. No matter how much you think, you're too weak and stupid. Don't you realize that you should rest if you feel tired? The Empress squeezed the fabric of her dress with her hand. A predator like him wouldn't be able to understand her, Angie thought. She didn't do anything, just practiced and still passed out. No one in this country realizes, she thought bitterly, that not everyone has that kind of power. Tears rolled from her eyes. I know if you're tired, you need to rest. The Emperor looked at her in amazement. He didn't expect to see her suddenly start crying. Angie hastily wiped her tears with her hand, her voice shaking. I've already tried my hardest not to die. Ranieri laughed briefly, almost with a slight chuckle. You're not going to die. Angelica pouted and looked at him through her tears. You're a liar. The Emperor didn't answer. He simply stood up and walked over to her. He gently lowered her down, supporting her head with his palm. His voice was calm and commanding. Duchess, bring cold water and silk towels. With a mad, frightening smile, he leaned toward her face, his voice coming with cold steel. It seems the Empress is very ill. I will take care of you. Suddenly, the Emperor threw a wet towel on her forehead. He stood watching the water droplets roll leisurely down Angie's forehead. Ranieri asked if the towel was too wet, to which he received a short no. The Emperor turned away from her, tossing her over his shoulder. I guess that won't work. Call a maid. When Nemra arrived, she wordlessly began to take care of the Empress, replacing the Emperor. Ranieri uttered with bewilderment. Because of her physique, her temperature rises from a single movement. I've never seen such a thing. The maid glanced at him, and bowing slightly, said quietly, It's because she's too weak. Settling back in his chair, Ranieri smirked as he looked at Angie. You're so pathetic. Also that sickly look. I'm starting to get annoyed with it. Angelica immediately tensed, recognizing the very pose the Emperor usually struck before a storm. Her face contorted with consternation, his every movement, every look, as if screaming free. With concern in her eyes, Angie turned to Nemra, timidly asking if she could bring her something to eat. 10 minutes later, the maid returned, carrying a tray of fragrant, warm food. The Emperor, without waiting, took a spoon and began to feed her himself, saying that her mouth was even too small. He turned to her with an icy smile. We will have to stay in the palace tomorrow, Empress. With a teasing grin, mockingly, he uttered, I want to see that training. He hoped it would be fun to watch her run away, but if it continued like this, wouldn't he see the hunter become the prey? He set the empty plate on the tray, speaking in a low voice. Just as I thought, you can't entertain me on a winter hunt. It seems too much for you. Ranieri looked at her with a frightened expression on his face. What am I going to get after waiting so long? The Empress met his gaze with consternation, finding not an ounce of mercy in it. Even though she was the hunter now, she knew it would only be a few months before she was the prey. Of course, she was going to escape before he met Serafina, but Angie blurted out excitedly, as if clinging to her last hope. Your Majesty, please believe in me. Now we are looking for a mentor to make the training work. The Emperor raised an eyebrow in surprise as he looked at his wife. A mentor? Angelica replied with a tremor in her voice. Yes, because otherwise I would be of no use to you at all. His face softened, an unexpected warmth in his voice. Not at all. She furrowed her eyebrows as if she couldn't believe her own ears. Really? Angelica said with a determination she herself lacked. I promise I'll find an excellent mentor. He touched his fingers to his chin thoughtfully, as if weighing something important. You haven't found anyone yet, have you? When the Empress said not yet, Ranieri replied briefly without averting his gaze. He would be her mentor himself. Angie froze, her eyes rounded in surprise. Oh, what? With icy calmness, he asked if he should repeat himself. She immediately shook her head. Angie clutched her hand to her chest and whispered, I'll never forget the time you spent on me. The medicine finally worked, and the Empress was on the mend. But the thought kept her wondering maybe the recovery wasn't from the infusion, but because Ranieri had been around all night. Indeed, he did not leave her until midnight, returning to his chambers only with the first rays of dawn. Sitting up on the bed, the Empress asked Sisian when she had practice. She only shrugged her shoulders, confused, answering that she didn't know. Angie immediately jumped up, gathering all her resolve. Sisian, we need to hurry up. Packing quickly, Angelica thought feverishly about the fact that she had to get there before Ranieri did. When she reached the practice field, she wiped the sweat from her forehead, breathing heavily. And the moment she asked if he had come yet, a familiar voice sounded from behind her, and he came close and said, Good morning. She turned around, frightened. Behind her back stood her husband, whose cold calmness made her shiver more than the wind. He said, It's past 10 o'clock. Looks like you took your time. The Emperor turned his head to the side. I've been here for 2 hours. Ranieri shifted his gaze to her hands. What have you got there? Angie sighed quietly. I'm still too weak. My arms are only good for a bow. She looked down at her palms in amazement, and now there was a completely different bow in them, lighter, more comfortable, as if it had been made just for her. Ranieri looked at her questioningly. Have you ever thought of using the weapon that's perfect for you? The Empress's cheeks flushed slightly, and her voice trembled with embarrassment. Well, I asked you to bring me the onions myself. This new bow was much lighter than before, almost weightless, but she knew even the most perfect bow was useless if her hands were shaking and the bowstring was not tight. With a gleam in her eyes, Angie looked at the bow her husband had given her, gratitude stirring in her heart. Ranieri suddenly placed his palm on her cheek, his voice sounding almost caring. You have a fever. He grinned slightly, low-key, almost mockingly. The medicine didn't seem to help. The Empress embarrassedly pressed her hand to where his palm had just been. Turning around, Ranieri moved forward, sliding her a sideways glance. Let's get started. Angelica looked at him in surprise. He hadn't said a word about being late. In an instant he was at her side, cradling her with one arm and holding the sword at her throat with the other. Angelica looked at him fearfully, screaming for mercy in her thoughts. Ranieri was bored of practicing on unanswered targets in less than 30 minutes. He then pulled out a wooden sword from somewhere, and they immediately began practicing. The Emperor uttered, "The best practice is real combat conditions." The Empress stood fearfully in front of the Emperor, unable to look away. Angie's swordsmanship abilities were negligible compared to Ranieri's, and he confirmed it by saying she was hopeless. Without giving her the slightest chance of winning, he predicted her every move with frightening accuracy. The Empress looked tiredly at her sword, which she had barely managed to block Ranieri's blow with. Angie gathered her strength, bringing her sword closer, preparing to attack. But at the same instant she dropped her weapon. The Emperor easily dodged and knocked it out of her hands. With a smirk, he uttered, "I could have slit your throat with that same move." Angelica lay on the ground, tired, defeated. Ranieri towered over her, pointing his sword at her. Tucking his sword behind his back, the Emperor asked, "Do you believe me now?" Still lying there, she looked up and whispered, "Yes, Your Majesty." He held out his hand to help her up. "Will you tell me that your eyes fail you also because of a chronic illness?" The girl exhaled nervously. "The difference between us is colossal." The Emperor looked at her thoughtfully. "Do you think you'll be spared in combat conditions, too?" Eventually, Ranieri began to explain the basics of swordsmanship to the Empress step by step, moving her waist if she wants to adjust her distance with her opponent. Proper use of the shoulders, elbows, and wrists are the foundation of controlling the trajectory of the sword, though Ranieri complained that she might not be able to repeat after him. Ranieri didn't seem to have any thoughts of stopping the Empress's training, calmly continuing to tell her what she should do. The thought flashed through Angie's mind that someone who couldn't stand this kind of tedium had voluntarily chosen to immerse himself in it. As the training came to an end, she looked at Ranieri. "Thank you for the training. I will try my best no matter how long it takes." The Emperor looked at the Empress with a nonchalant expression, as if he was watching someone else's performance. Suddenly, quite unexpectedly for Angelica, he ran his hand gently over her head. No matter how big the Actilus Empire is, rumors spread faster than wildfire. News of the upcoming hunting festival has already spread throughout the community. The festival will be held on the day of the summer solstice, in the new hunting grounds. Sylvia Jacques, the Emperor, and the Empress are all listed among the hunters. Walking down the corridor accompanied by the maids, Angie thought things seemed to be working out pretty well, but she was injured during one of her training sessions, and the Emperor, to her surprise, took care of her for a long time. Ranieri waited for her for 2 whole hours without expressing a single bit of annoyance at her helplessness. He even gave her a bow, an act completely out of character for him. Angie glanced at the maid, the one who had spread the rumors. Now everyone from the nobility of the capital to the people in the neighboring country knew about these episodes. Angelica sighed, thinking about what the Empress's maids could do to hide the unnecessary truth and to embellish a little the Emperor and Empress. All of this is a little bit of fortification, she thought. Whatever the case, the girl still cherished the dream of escaping. She didn't want to become another subject for gossip. Now the Empress had to play the role of an exemplary wife of the Emperor. Who knows when some other Marquis Jacques will appear? Opening the heavy, massive door, she froze as a mountain of gift boxes lay before her. Angie turned to the maids in surprise. What was the meaning of all this? They replied that all the gifts were from the Emperor. Still at a loss, Angie mumbled, "Is this for the whole empire?" But the Duchess calmly replied that it was only half of His Majesty's gifts. With a sweet, almost luscious smile, the Duchess added that it would take a little time for the rumors to reach the deepest village. But the Empress immediately realized the Duchess's ingratiation of late was for a reason. The Empress would have even liked all of this, if it weren't for one thing. The Duchess used to serve Roberta Jacques. Angie carefully opened the letter, and running her eyes over the lines, read aloud. Looking forward to the hunt. Angelica looked at Sicien and asked when the hunting grounds would be ready. She said calmly that it would be about 3 days. No matter how hard the Empress tried, she was well aware that it would not be easy to defeat the Jacques family. Sticking a diced tomato on her fork, Angie pondered, if not by force, she would defeat them with other weapons of information. It was time for another training session. The Emperor and Empress were once again dueling, honing the art of the sword. When her strength finally left her, she collapsed to the ground without strength and whispered, "Your Majesty, I can't go on." Ranieri looked at her with his usual cold-bloodedness. "You know, seeing you, I'm beginning to doubt the human race." Sitting on the cold stone floor, Angie thought bitterly, how many times had she lost already? 1,000? Or maybe 2? She looked at him with a slight hesitation. Maybe she should try practicing running. He replied with a shrug that he didn't even know. Turning away, Ranieri uttered, "Let's see the hunting grounds." The Empress stepped forward and froze in amazement as she looked at the majestic view spread out before her. The thought flashed through her mind, things really are done in this empire in a big way. Leaning on a rock, she said quietly, "You can see the other side of the world from this tower. It's perfect for archery." Ranieri, keeping his gaze on her, spoke, "I want you to know I really did try for you." Then his face softened and he smiled. "Do you like these grounds?" The Empress looked at him, blushing slightly. "Yes." Shifting his gaze to the side, Ranieri uttered, "I had fun teaching you at first, but you're so clumsy that now I'm concerned." He smirked, a slight sneer in his tone. "I trained you personally. I can demand payment for that as well." Still looking at her, the boy said with a mysterious intonation, "Huntress in summer and prey in winter, looking forward to it." From that day on, it was as if time had sped up every morning. The Empress began with training with Ranieri. Angie has been preparing for the summer solstice unsparingly from night to morning. Although the Empress was sad about not seeing Sylvia Jacques anymore, she didn't have time to think about it now. All the more reason for her to just want to get some rest. The Emperor entered her chambers. As soon as he crossed the threshold, all the maids silently disappeared. Angie thought they would all scatter again at Ranieri's appearance. She looked at him with slight horror, to which he replied, "You should be braver. Are you worried again?" Angie lowered her eyes and whispered with faint fear, "I'm scared." The Emperor glanced at her, asking if she was what? A defenseless rabbit. His voice sounded with mockery. As he approached her, he asked her why she was looking at him like that, to which she replied, "Did I look at you wrong somehow?" Ranieri replied with a smile, "You are laughing at me with your eyes. You have become very bold, Empress." Trying to justify herself, Angie replied, "That's not true. You just compared me to a small, cute, and fluffy animal." As soon as Angelica uttered that she wasn't like that at all, the Emperor moved closer to her face, much to her surprise. Without thinking long, Ranieri nestled his lips against hers. The Emperor gently pulled her hair aside, undoing the cape on top. He dropped the cloth from her shoulders that covered her body. The girl blushed at the realization of what the Emperor wanted. Ranieri pulled away from Angie, looking at her. He smirked. "It's in your blood to be unintelligent, and I've already found out all the things the Empress likes." After saying that, the girl's face became more flushed. Silence hung between them, heavy and tense, like a taut string. The Emperor took her by the shoulders and grinned. "Let's stop here." He led the blushing Empress forward. "I know what you've been waiting for. I'm sorry, too." They stopped at the mirror. Ranieri stood with the Empress in front of the mirror, showing her herself without the cape. Angie's gaze flicked to the fabric. She hadn't expected that one cape could transform a look so much. The Emperor uttered with a smile, "I was told it is worn without extra clothing on the body." She barely managed herself, trying not to give away the tremor in her voice. Angie answered him, "It's beautiful, thank you." Taking her hair, he held it up to his face. "It suits your hair color. I hope you wear it to the summer solstice banquet." Her face contorted in shock, now realizing what it was for. The Emperor took her frightened face in his hand. "If you die while hunting, this outfit will become derelict. It's the June summer solstice. Today is a long-awaited and crucial day. The hunt will start in the afternoon, making the Empress nervous. From the moment she was displaced, her only goal was to survive." The Empress turned to the maids. "Let's go." She went out onto the balcony where the Emperor was waiting for her, telling herself that another half a year and she would escape. Angie turned to her spouse with a smile. "Am I late today?" to which he answered her briefly late and pulled her hand toward him. The emperor pulled his wife so that she was now sitting on his lap. "I've been waiting for you for 2 hours." It flashed through her mind. If anyone saw a picture like this, they would think their relationship was blissful. Still holding her on his lap, he gently inquired about her well-being, to which he received a short reply, "Not bad." Ranieri looked at her, a sparkle playing in his eyes. "What are you going to do once you enter the hunting grounds?" Angie, without flinching, said with a confident face, "I'll run to the center to take the highest position." When she added that she wanted to avoid close combat, a slight smile touched his lips. The emperor uttered with a chuckle, "But you couldn't even withstand my blow." As soon as the empress replied that she had lasted 30 minutes, he interrupted her, leaning forward slightly. "Do you know why?" With a smirk of smugness, Ranieri replied, "Because I was moving awfully slow." Suddenly there was music, its rhythm as if announcing the beginning of something great. Solemn words heralded the start of the festival in honor of the summer solstice day. The emperor and empress walked to the railing and the crowd broke into applause. Ranieri, ignoring the people's stares, grabbed the embarrassed Angie's hand. The subjects, unable to hide their delight, began to whisper as they watched them hold hands. Angelica looked up at the sky and the bright rays of the sun began to blind her slightly. In the heart of the garden, there is a pavilion wrapped in vivid green vines, a table on a dais, with the emperor and empress behind it, and rows of tables laden with viands along the path. Ranieri, noticing out of the corner of his eye that Angie wasn't eating anything, leaned over to her quietly asking if she had an appetite. In response, she said no. Why should there be an appetite if the girl has been nervous about the upcoming hunt since the morning? The emperor gestured gently toward her, sliding a glass filled with a ruby liquid. After he said it was a gift, she looked at the glass in surprise. Angie stared intently at the drink. Its hue was strikingly different from what Ranieri was drinking. Ranieri suddenly whispered in her ear, interrupting her train of thought, "Be sure to drink to the bottom, okay?" Obeying his words, she brought the glass to her lips, and as she took a sip, she heard the emperor say with a lazy chuckle, "You would even drink poison if I gave it to you." With the last sip, Angie's pupils dilated. Heat spilled over her body, as if a flame had erupted inside. She coughed, unable to comprehend what was happening to her. Ranieri looked at her with a sly grin. "Be patient, Angie. It'll get good soon enough." Still coughing, the girl leaned her hand on the emperor's chest, looking for some balance. But suddenly, Angie burst into a ringing, strange laugh. All the guests at the table turned to her in surprise. Placing her hand on her forehead, the empress uttered, "What are you doing? Why aren't you enjoying the viands?" With a mad smile, Ranieri looked around at everyone. "Didn't you hear what the empress said?" Angie nonchalantly began to cut the meat, a splash of liquid flying around the plate. The empress gorged herself greedily into the steak as if she were furious. The flavor seemed strangely bright to her, all sensations of the liquid heightened. Licking her lips, she whispered deliciously with a mad glint in her eyes. From the moment the emperor poured alcohol for her, the strange sensation did not leave the empress. Her body was either filled with heat and became airy, or suddenly became heavy. Now, instead of worrying, Angie waited feverishly for the hunt to begin. The maid brought a box with some strange liquid to the empress, bowing and saying that it was from the emperor. As Angie took the diamond-like vessel, Nirma spoke softly. "Solio is a purified form of a deadly poison produced by poisonous frogs." Angelica looked at the liquid with an almost crazed look, and at that moment the Duchess added, "His Majesty said you would know how to use it." The music played again, and the voices said, "Greetings to Her Majesty the Empress." The Empress looked around the hall, and it flashed through her mind what a pity it was that everyone had gathered to watch this, but they wouldn't be able to see anything outside the fence. The prey is already lurking in the hunting grounds, lurking in anticipation of the challenge. Licking her lips, Angie wondered where she would find Jacques' family. Her gaze flickered to Sylvia, who was standing off to the side, shivering faintly. Sylvia held back a shudder, reassuring herself that everything would be all right. While Angelica's thoughts surfaced, she must prove herself worthy to be her maid. A few weeks ago, Sylvia Jacques had knelt before her. The pity she had then aroused now seemed false. If she does, she deserves a reward, and if she doesn't, Sylvia just dies. The hall now welcomed the Emperor, who was striding toward the dueling ground. Ranieri walked over to the Empress and quietly said, "Empress, didn't I tell you? You will not die." A crooked grin appeared on her face. She thought about what he had put in her drink. Just then, their conversation was interrupted by the announcement of the start of the hunting ground. Order in the territory was determined by the status of the first Sylvia walked. Angie's face contorted with excitement, and she couldn't wait to get in there. Now the Empress and the Emperor were becoming similar. Angie's body was so light it felt ridiculous. Her vantage point was perfect. The hunting ground spread out in front of her like the palm of her hand. With a focused expression, Angelica carefully applied the poison to the arrowheads given to Ranieri. She tensed every muscle, catching the slightest sound like a predator. Sylvia looked up and noticed the Empress overhead. Her bow was pointed directly at her. Doubting and trembling, Sylvia squeezed herself out. "Your Majesty." The mischievous glint in Angie's eyes immediately disappeared when she realized who Sylvia Jacques was targeting. Sylvia, as if she was about to say something to the Empress, suddenly froze as someone's hand abruptly reached out to her. Angelica nervously shifted her gaze to Sylvia. The girl was grabbed by the hair by her mother, Roberta. With a face twisted with anger, Roberta hissed, "My poor daughter, I will tear your heart out of your breast and present it to the Emperor." Without letting go of Sylvia, with the same fury, Roberta continued, "I will sacrifice you to the god Ectila on this day of the summer solstice, and I will survive because of it." With a smirk, the Empress pointed her bow at Roberta. "Is this the secret trick the Jacques family prepared?" As Sylvia and her mother clutched at each other in a wild scramble, Angie tensed, trying to aim. After waiting a moment, she released the arrow that came off the bowstring and burst into the air. But the arrow passed the target, and it did not go unnoticed. Sylvia and her mother turned around simultaneously at the sound Roberta asked who it was. Seeing that it was the Empress, Roberta became furious, but before she could do anything about it, Sylvia felled her to the ground with fury. Clenching her teeth, Sylvia clutched at her mother. "I'm not leaving it like this." The mother also clutched at her daughter's hair, and as they merged in a furious fight, Sylvia shouted out, "Mom, you want to kill me to survive, but what about me?" Fumbling for the stone under her hand, Sylvia picked it up, squeezing her fingers to the point of pain. She towered over her mother, despair blazing in her eyes. With a stone in her hand, she pronounced that she too wanted to live. Sylvia started throwing punches, screaming that she didn't want to die, she wanted to live. With a frantic expression on her face and a trembling voice, she said, "I will survive, and I will find a new home." The Empress started slowly down the stairs, thinking that Ranieri would no doubt wish he hadn't seen this. Angie stopped in front of Sylvia and looked up startled, barely recognizing the figure in front of her. Sylvia knelt down in front of her, placing her hand on her chest and saying that this was her prey and for her to accept the trophy. Smiling, Angelica replied, "It's delightful, Sylvia." Finishing Roberta with one precise movement, the Empress smiled contentedly. Sylvia, barely containing her trembling, smiled nervously. "So I can survive then." Angie turned around sharply as there was a thud behind her as Sylvia fell over. She glanced at her nonchalantly, and the next thing that came into her mind sounded then. At the same instant, a voice came from behind Henry Jacques. "Mom?" Without hesitating for a second, the Empress aimed her bow directly at the Marquise. As Angie raised her bow, Henry suddenly started laughing. After casting one last glance at his mother's mutilated body, he raised his eyes to the Empress. The Marquis cried out, turning to her. How could she do that? Angie and Henry Jacques prepared for battle. She drew her arrow, and he got into a fighting stance. The Empress launched an arrow into the air, which stabbed into the Marquis' shoulder with precision. Her face took on a tense look. Angie had hit his shoulder, which meant the poison should have already entered his body. Suddenly, Angelica felt strange. Her hands trembled. The Empress's entire body was pierced with pain, and it became unbearably hot. Marquis Jacques lunged at her, knocking the bow out of Angie's hands. She spun, losing her balance. With a clatter, the Imperatrix fell to the ground. The girl lay there, not realizing what was happening to her body. The Empress twisted in pain while Henry approached, looking down at her. The Marquis raised his weapon over her, preparing to deliver the fatal blow, uttering with fury, "I'll kill you." Angie squeezed her eyes shut. Preparing for the blow in her mind was only one phrase, "I don't want to die." But suddenly, like a ghost from the shadows, the Emperor appeared from behind, thrusting his sword into Henry Jacques. Angie looked at them fearfully. The Emperor uttered, "I told you so." Ranieri looked up at her with a reassuring smile. "You're not going to die." He walked over and gently lifted her up, laying Angie on his lap. Tears welled up in the Empress' eyes. She whispered through the pain that she was in pain, and he replied with the same smile, "Painful? It is such medicine." The Emperor began to explain to the girl, in a subdued voice, "The remedy you took allowed you to go beyond human capabilities." He pulled a vial from behind his belt, saying, "Imagine what would have happened if I hadn't shown up on time." Ranieri opened a vial of mysterious liquid. After all, this potion has the disadvantage of overloading the body and can suddenly lose its effectiveness, so it can't be used for military purposes. The Empress looked at him still with tears in her eyes, her gaze full of confusion and pain. Opening the vial, Ranieri poured the liquid into his mouth. "And another medicine. Don't look at me like that." The Emperor gently lifted her head to his, transferring the liquid into her mouth with his own. Angelica coughed, not immediately able to cope with the bitterness of the medicine. But after a little while, the pain receded, the body felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off it. Ranieri placed his large palm on her head. His voice was calm. "Thanks to you, I had fun." He pointed his hand at Roberta and Henry lying on the ground. "Look, it's all your booty." Angie looked apprehensively at the immobilized bodies. Her heart clenched as the Emperor spoke. "You are now a full-fledged citizen of Actilis." He looked at her with a satisfied smirk. "Tonight's banquet will be dedicated to you as the new full-fledged resident of our empire." After the duel was over, they stood on the balcony in front of all the servants, and Ranieri said with solemnity, "Attention, gentlemen, the Empress has personally caught the prey of today's hunt is complete." One of the residents, seized by elation, exclaimed, "Now that the Empress has completed the hunt." Everyone bowed to the Emperor and Empress. One of the residents shouted that she was now a full-fledged citizen of Actilis. No matter how you look at it, the people of Actilis worship power, and their attitude towards the Empress has changed since that day. One of the subjects uttered, "The Empress is indeed worthy of our Emperor." Those words made the Emperor smirk, and Angie, on the contrary, become nervous. Ranieri gently pulled Angelica against him. "The evening banquet will be dedicated to the Empress." Solemn music played in the light-filled castle. The Empress arrived at the hall where, seated on the throne, the Emperor was waiting for her. Ranieri pointed to the throne next to him, telling her to take her new seat. When the Empress sat on the throne, the Emperor looked at her thoughtfully, and she asked, "Why do you look at me like that?" Without thinking long, Ranieri replied, "You're adorable." Angie thanked him, to which he squinted with a slight play in his voice and asked, "You won't even ask why?" Angelica looked at him, slightly puzzled. "I don't know what exactly you meant, but I appreciate the compliment, Your Majesty." With a soft, almost affectionate smile, Ranieri pronounced, "You're getting more graceful every day. I notice it." The Emperor suddenly added that he now had her face memorized. These words caused Angie to be genuinely surprised. The Empress looked at him perplexed, not knowing how to react. Memorizing faces isn't a supernatural gift, but in the book she was reading, Ranieri didn't have that skill. She was still in shock that he had memorized her face. At this time, the Emperor gently placed his hand on her back. "Empress, come to me." Ranieri smirked, leaning closer. "What are you thinking so passionately about?" When Angie said nothing, he moved closer to her face. Without warning, the silence between them grew larger. Pulling away slightly, the Empress looked away, perplexed as to what had gotten into him. Ranieri suddenly took his wife by the waist, pulling her to him, while she said she was still dizzy from the medication. When Angie pronounced that she was still dizzy, he said coldly, "I hate liars." Remembering how Ranieri could ruin the first dance, she decided not to provoke him with unnecessary words. Angie tensed slightly. She hadn't had time for dance lessons because of the preparations for the hunt. Luckily, Angelica's body remembered every move. As they began to dance, she almost stepped on his foot and began to lose her balance. Suddenly, the Empress began to fall, but the Emperor didn't react in any way. As she approached the floor, she suddenly saw his hand reaching out to her. But Angie didn't have time to grab his hand. Her fingers only slid through the air, because of which the girl, having lost her footing, promptly landed on the ground. The Emperor only looked at her with a blank, inexpressive expression. Suddenly Ranieri uttered, "Well done." Angelica exhaled a sigh of relief, for if she had grabbed his hand, she would have touched him without permission. The Emperor glanced over his shoulder at the people who were staring at them. "What are you looking at?" Ranieri lifted the Empress into his arms, causing her to gasp in surprise. He looked at her with a slight, almost elusive smile. "Are you all right?" After she replied that she was fine, he placed her on the throne. With a calm expression, he sat down on his own. She was slightly annoyed at his question, since he hadn't even tried to catch her before. The banquet table was spread with delicious, appetizingly decorated food. Everyone around them was talking animatedly about something and enjoying the festivities. Taking a glass of wine, Angie brought it to her lips. Everyone was engrossed in making new acquaintances. Suddenly, Sylvia Jacques sat down on her knees in front of her. "Greetings, Empress." People present at the banquet began to discuss Sylvia, saying it was shameless. Without stopping their discussions, people began to condemn Sylvia even more. How dare she come to the banquet? She seems to have no pride at all. One of the devotees addressed the Empress. "Your Majesty, the mere sight of this family's daughter wounds my devotion." He pointed at Sylvia. "Please escort her out of the banquet hall." Angie looked at him surprised. Who, me? When the Empress pronounced for what, the man exclaimed, For what? You still ask? The Empress answered him confidently, And what kind of loyalty is it if she is hurt by such a small thing? Sylvia proved her loyalty to me. She was willing to sacrifice her family ties for me. Angelica smiled as she held up her glass of red wine. Doesn't that make Sylvia more loyal than you? The man thought he had said something unnecessary and turned to her. Your Majesty. The Emperor chuckled at the situation. What busy words. Thank you for amusing me. The Empress awkwardly said she was just kidding. The submitters laughed, saying she had a great sense of humor. Angie's awkwardness intensified as shame flashed through her thoughts. Sylvia turned to the Emperor. Your Majesty, I have come for the reward you promised. To which the Emperor replied to her briefly, Good. Ranieri pronounced, As promised, I am appointing Sylvia Jacques as the Empress's personal maid. These words shocked everyone in the room, silencing everyone. Angie glanced at Sylvia, thinking it was a pity she wasn't the Empress. Sylvia could have waited for an appointment as the Empress's maid, but Sylvia preferred to hear those words here, in front of the entire high society. Now no one will dare to be rude to Sylvia, because that is the privilege of the Empress's personal maid. Having praised Sylvia in thought, she was suddenly addressed. The Empress shifted her gaze to where the voice had come from. Cecian addressed her, asking, May I allow them to greet you personally? Angie thought banquets were the best place to make the necessary acquaintances. Smiling sweetly at them, she calmly replied, I'd be happy to chat with any of you. Angelica sat near the fountain, looking up at the beautiful sky. The girl hunched over, slightly tired. This day had sucked all the energy out of her. Straightening her back, she thought that despite the evening, the sun was still high. The girl tried to understand why exactly she had gotten here and why she had become an empress. Her eyes suddenly widened at the sound of footsteps behind her. Angelica turned around. Your Majesty? Ranieri walked towards the girl who was walking towards him. You did a great job. The Emperor looked at the flower in his hand. You look so carefree even though you killed a man. He put a flower in her hair. Not everyone would have been able to bear it so calmly. Angie lowered her gaze, and here the Emperor was right. Angelica began to think self-defense or not, she was a killer now, and regret wouldn't help here. The Empress turned to the Emperor. In fact, if it weren't for the circumstances, I wouldn't have been able to truly kill a human being. Angie said confidently, I did it to survive. The girl bowed to him, saying she had to thank him, to which Ranieri asked what for. The Empress smiled excitedly. If you hadn't killed Henry Jacques then, I would be dead by now. To which the Emperor smiled at her. That's how it is. To her, such entertainment is akin to beetle fights, but ants have a reason to fight, and they had none. That's why the Emperor drugged her with a forbidden substance, fun for which there is no substitute. Knowing the consequences, Ranieri felt no guilt. On the contrary, he savored every moment. Only the Emperor didn't expect things to turn out this way in the end. Will she try to escape, or scream in terror? That question tormented him. But when, instead of drowning in the gloom, she entered the hall cheerfully in the dress the Emperor had given her. Suddenly then, the Emperor was abruptly pierced by a slight shiver. It was only then that he truly saw her facial features. Ranieri glanced at her, thinking how strange. He held out his hand to her. Let's go back. Angie looked at his hand in surprise. Still, the girl put her hand in his. It was the first time the Emperor could recognize someone else's face. Ranieri smiled slightly, thinking in his mind that this was the face of some weakling. When they returned to the banquet, Angelica looked around. It was her first visit to the imperial palace. Ranieri opened the door to the room in front of them. Angie looked forward in surprise, recognizing the place. Spread out before them was a spacious, deserted room, with one single window, Ranieri's secret room. The Empress learned about it from a book, but who would have thought she would end up here with him? Angelica looked at the Emperor in surprise as he began to unbutton his shirt. She blushed slightly, wondering why he was undressing in such a place this time. Ranieri removed his shirt, exposing his torso, and turned to her. You like it? Unexpectedly to her, he took her hand, looking somewhere in the distance. The Emperor pressed his consort against the cold door. Behind Ranieri splashed a large pool of crystal clear water. He brought his face close to hers, to which she said, Wait. Angie covered her eyes while he was still so close. Should I stop? Suddenly, the Emperor pulled away from the Empress. Angelica looked at him with slight defeat. Ranieri was already standing in the pool and looked at her and said, Join us. Without thinking long, Angie took off her shoes. She put her feet into the water, which was hot, to which the Emperor said, Put your feet in the water. You'll soon get used to it. The Empress gazed out over the water, lost in the brilliance of the reflections, wondering why he had shown her the secret imperial room. Ranieri caught her gaze and spoke softly. There's that look on your face again. Suddenly, the emperor abruptly grabbed her leg. He lifted her in his arms, holding her securely by her legs and back. When she muttered something about the dress, Ranieri interrupted her. "Forget about it." The emperor smirked, looking into her flushed face. "Is the water still hot?" Angie looked away slightly, awkwardly mumbling, "No, it's just the pose that bothers me." Angelica wanted to touch him, but hesitated. The emperor noticed this, and he was suddenly pleased that she retained such a noble trait. Though admittedly Ranieri was annoyed at this point, this restraint was starting to get on his nerves. Suddenly he spoke, unexpectedly even to her. He looked up at her from the bottom of his eyes and said calmly, "I authorize it." Angelica, accepting the silent invitation, wrapped her arms around his neck and snuggled into him. The emperor easily plopped the empress on the bed, hovering over her. She lifted her head from the pillow and cast a slightly embarrassed look at him. Ranieri smirked back, his gaze sparkling. He pinned her hands to the bed, imperiously, but without harshness. And now she was asleep, lying before him, all given over to the power of sleep. He wrapped the towel around his neck and looked at the sleeping figure. "I didn't let you fall asleep, so willful." Even if Ranieri closes his eyes, he can still see her in front of him. Now Angelica could rightfully be considered a resident of Actilis. People would treat her with respect. The girl, who had taken up arms only a month ago, was able to defeat the more experienced fighters. Suddenly, she trembled in her sleep. This could not escape the emperor's attention. Angie was thrashing around in her sleep, mumbling squeakily, "No!" Ranieri gently lifted her head. Had a nightmare? He kissed his spouse on the lips, wanting to comfort her. But when she began to wake up, she bit his lip in fright. Ranieri grimaced in pain, but didn't pull away. Without thinking, he nestled his lips against hers again. It was only by pulling away that a scarlet drop slid down from his lip. The emperor gazed into the face of his wife, who began to narrate, still half in a dream. "In my dream, the prey." Tears glistened in Angelica's eyes. "Headless prey stalked me." Still shivering, she placed her hand on his chest. She had an axe. Angie pressed herself against him, her words ringing in the silence, asking for protection. "I'm so scared." Ranieri hugged the empress tightly, covering her with his body. "It's okay." Angelica was still in the power of sleep when someone's voice began to call out to her. She woke up slowly, catching a strange noise. When the emperor asked if she was ignoring him, Angie jumped up like a scalded woman. Angelica looked at him fearfully, immediately pulling herself up. "I'm sorry. You woke me up and I didn't hear." Now Angie, a citizen of Actilis, her name is known. She is respected, she is admired. The emperor cast a glance over his shoulder at her. "Wash up and change your clothes before you apologize." The empress sat at the table opposite the emperor. There were dishes filled with exquisite food in front of them, but the atmosphere was heavy. Ranieri looked at her with that same predatory gaze that gave her goosebumps. Angie felt a chill run down her spine. Breakfast at the palace seemed like torture to her. She ventured to speak, quietly, almost out of breath as they sat at the table. Lowering her gaze, she barely audibly whispered, "I want to go home." Immediately anxiety rose in her. She should have said, "To the Empress's palace." The emperor looked at her coldly. "Isn't this your home?" She ran a hand through her hair awkwardly. "I'm sorry, I'm talking nonsense because I haven't had time to wake up yet. Today is the very day that Sylvia is to enter the Empress Palace." Angie was anxious before this event. Ranieri, without taking his eyes off his plate, began cutting his food. "Didn't you just want to go home?" Angie watched him nervously. It was as if the emperor had read her mind. Angelica shifted her gaze to his lips and remarked, "A lip wound? It wasn't there yesterday." He looked at her with a stern, silent rebuke. Angie anxiously looked into his face. "Your Majesty, I apologize if my look was too harsh. I'm just worried. There's blood on your lip." The emperor took her sharply by the hair, jerking her closer to him. With a cold smirk, he said, "Since you're so worried, take a closer look." Moving closer to her ear, he whispered, "You did it, didn't you?" Angie looked at him fearfully. Doubt reflected in her eyes. Did she really look like she had gone insane? Her mind was racing with thoughts of whether to admit it or deny it, to say she didn't believe she could have done such a thing. When she said, trembling, that she did not think such a thing possible, he answered at once, without pause. "Why do you think so?" Gathering herself, she looked him straight in the eye and said firmly, "If I had dared to wound your Majesty, I doubt my head would still be on my shoulders." As the Empress exhaled in relief, Ranieri calmly said, "It is." He leaned toward her, his fingers circling her chin, his gaze piercing to the point of shivering. "That's right, the abrasion on my face. That's a terrible crime." With the same dangerous, teasing smirk, he continued, as if toying with her, "Then there should be an appropriate punishment for that, am I right? When Angie gave a barely perceptible nod, he said, almost affectionately, but with a predatory smile, "That's why I can't let you go home." He looked at her, still with the same expression. "The man who hurt my lips must be punished. You are guilty, and yet you want to go back to your palace." With a grin in which you could hear the unappealing decision, he threw in, "Now you will stay close to me." Her face contorted in an instant this time, not from fear, but from shock breaking through. Every morning, the Emperor sorted out the letters that arrived from different parts of the world. During the day, a series of meetings, negotiations, and advice, and at night, he devoted himself to training. Angelica bowed her head and carried out her punishment, wondering when she would get a chance to slip away, maybe during his next negotiation. The Emperor shifted his gaze to her abruptly. "What are you standing there for?" Angie looked at him with a bit of incomprehension, recalling his own words as he told her to stand, but Ranieri repeated, "I asked you why you were standing." Confused, she replied, "Because there are no chairs here?" Without losing his equanimity, he turned to the servant, dropping a short order to bring her a chair. Half playfully, he added, "If you keep standing like that, it'll look like you're looking down on me." Angelica, as if scalded, knelt down in front of him. "That was not my intention. I apologize." Ranieri, without even blinking, looked at her with his previous indifference. "You've become more compliant, haven't you? You can stand up." The Emperor smirked, as if taking pleasure in her embarrassment. "I understand your desire to not be above the Emperor, however." His mocking words made her cheeks flush. "Are you going to kneel when they bring a chair?" The Empress was still standing on the floor, staring at one point, thinking of one thing and one thing only: how to get home. Ranieri could see clearly what she was thinking. Silently, with a slight movement, he shifted his gaze to his palm. In his hand lay a letter of parchment. It was a letter for him. Ranieri raised an eyebrow. "Is that a letter from Tunia's temple?" The temple of Tiunius was an abandoned sanctuary on a barren land, where only the believers in the God of mercy remained, having ceded all the fertile land to the world. The letter's meaning was simple. There was some tension between Actylos and the kingdom of Soambi and Ea, and the cause lay within the empire itself. Considering their pleas for help in the name of mercy to be presumptuous, Ranieri decided not to respond. Putting the letters aside, the man sighed deeply in boredom. Looking towards his wife, the Emperor called out to her in an authoritative manner. However, Angelica did not answer, and Ranieri found her sleeping on a chair nearby. Then he called out to her again, louder as if he was about to lose his patience. Approaching her, the man was outraged that the girl had allowed herself to fall asleep. Having received no answer, Ranieri, having closed the distance between them, gently touched the girl and seemed to intend to kiss her. Suddenly, Angelica shuddered and screamed in surprise. Hovering her lips in embarrassment, the girl gave the man a questioning look. The Empress's heart began to beat faster when the imperturbate Ranieri asked her not to sleep. Calmly returning to the table, the Emperor intended to get down to business while Angelica remained perplexed. The girl expressed awkwardness and was about to say something, and Ranieri allowed it. Feeling nervous, she offered to give her something to do, or at least let her look at the letters that had already been read. Her speech seemed sweet and innocent to the Emperor. The man understood that the Empress had the right to be informed about government affairs, but it was still too early. Ignoring his wife's offer, Ranieri continued to go about his business. Angelica became nervous and was perplexed, worrying that she had made a mistake. The girl's thoughts were obvious to the man, and he decided to continue to make fun of her suffering. For the rest of the day, the Emperor did not let Angelique out of his sight. The girl was by his side during lunch and at government meetings. Ranieri even brought her to a personal night training session, offering to fight. And only after all this, the Emperor deigned to release the girl. Seeing warily in her chambers, Angelica was glad to finally break away from Ranieri after 2 days of tension. So concerned, Irma covered her mistress with a blanket, citing the cool summer nights. Smiling softly, Angelica thanked her for her concern, after which the woman expressed sincere joy that the rulers of the empire had marital harmony. However, although this is how it looked to those around, for Angelica it was comparable to a nightmare. Angelique would be happy if the Emperor did not pay any attention to her. Then the girl gave a guilty look to Sylvia, who was standing next to her. "After all, I was planning to arrange some kind of reception for her in honor of becoming a maid of honor." She was sorry that nothing had come of it because of Ranieri, when suddenly Irma turned to her. Expressing respect, the woman noted that the Empress had been at her best during yesterday's hunt. She also said that the girl has now become the mother of the state, whom everyone loves and looks forward to meeting. He added enthusiastically that now the Empress would be able to go out into society. Angelica understood that this was also her responsibility, so she humbly agreed. With undisguised joy, and Irma shared that, in connection with this, she managed to spread several rumors in high society. The girl reacted excitedly and asked about it. And Irma hastily told that she had told everyone in advance about the kindness of her mistress, and also that at the beginning of the month people will be able to meet with Her Majesty, quietly adding that such an opportunity will not be available to everyone. Angelica looked calm, but she was terrified at the thought that there were only 3 weeks left until next month. Inspired, Irma volunteered to prepare the Empress for her debut in high circles, promising to support her in everything. The girl was depressed by the thought that the summer solstice had just passed, and she would have to plunge into work again. Dreaming of immediate freedom, Angelique was eager to think up an escape plan. Sunny summer day illuminated the grounds of the Empress's luxurious palace. There was only half a month left before Angelica's long-awaited debut, and the girl threw herself into her studies. Without noticing how time had flown by, the Empress diligently studied information about each noble family in the capital. The notes were full of information, and the girl's head was spinning, trying to remember everything. The book that she read carefully was recommended by Duchess and Irma, who ordered her to memorize everything. Suddenly, with one deft movement, Ranieri snatched the book from her hands. After running his eyes over the pages, the man showed interest in what his wife was doing. The girl thought to herself that the Emperor was visiting the Empress's palace too often. Falling onto the bed next to the girl, Ranieri noted that the information in the book was absolutely useless. By discarding her as something unnecessary, the man only confirmed his words. Touching the girl's chin, the Emperor demonstratively and carefully lifted it, having said that, given her position, she only needs to smile haughtily and boldly inform your interlocutor that although she doesn't know him and isn't trying to get to know him, she will allow him to introduce himself. Adding imperiously that as his wife, Angelica must assert her superiority, to which the girl hesitantly asked whether he meant that she should simply copy his behavior. But Ranieri only asked if there was a reason why she couldn't do that. Running his fingers through her curls, the man declared that only he knew how weak a creature she was. He also noted that if she couldn't follow his advice, she should at least learn to keep her facial expression. Frowning, Angelica realized that he was absolutely right. After all, she really was overly emotional. Then Ranieri, as if with concern, inquired about the girl's well-being, to which Angelica calmly noted that everything was fine with her. Ranieri answered her briefly and positively, which left the girl puzzled. A week later, the day of the important charity banquet arrived. In all seriousness, Size-An insisted that the event should be postponed. The Empress was unwell, and the girl was worried about this, but Irma insisted on attending the banquet. Angelica felt as if Ranieri had foreseen her condition, because she really wasn't feeling well. But it got worse. Firmly standing her ground, Size-An insisted that the Empress's health came first. However, Irma was convinced that Her Majesty needed to strengthen her position at court. The maids were ready to argue further, but Angelica hastened to stop them. The girl noted that they were both right in some ways, and now, after her achievements on the hunt, she could not pass up such an opportunity. Therefore, the Empress announced that she intended to attend the banquet, asking to take some medicine with her. Size-An reacted with concern, as things were already difficult for her mistress, but Angelica assured her that everything would go well. Smiling, the girl noted her joy at the support of such a loyal maid of honor. Angelica agreed with Size-An that life in the Empire was indeed difficult. However, as Empress, she is obliged to make sacrifices and fulfill her duties. Some time later, the banquet hall was filled with people of high society. Angelique was still feeling unwell, but she tried to overcome it. The girl understood that everyone has an individual organism, but in her past life this had not happened. But it was too late for her to complain. All she could do was endure it, showing herself in the best light at the banquet. Standing in front of everyone, Angelica thanked them for their visit, noting that it was an honor for her to host this banquet. Among the guests were noble ladies with great ambitions, selected by Duchess Irma for the Empress. Having taken her seat, Angelica was ready to communicate with the guests. The ladies surrounding her looked happy, but the girl saw them blurry. Her condition made it extremely difficult for her to concentrate. With horror, Angelica realized that she had lost the details of conversations with some of the guests. The girl was overcome with doubts about attending the banquet. She wondered what Ranieri would have done. The recent conversation with the Emperor immediately appeared in her head. Trying not to be nervous, Angelica tried to get ready, instantly changing her attitude towards everyone. The girl began to speak. She repeated Raniero's words almost exactly, as if following his example, which surprised the guests. Pointing to one of the ladies, the Empress ordered her to take a couple of steps back from the throne. With a forced grin, Angelica commanded her to tell her about herself briefly and clearly. Everyone present was shocked by such a sudden change in behavior. Angelique felt sorry for Duchess and Irma, but the girl could not show weakness. She intended to control this banquet and assert her superiority. Addressing the guests, Angelica haughtily declared that they were making her wait. Introducing herself as Akela Doshino, the excited lady quickly informed that her family owned the mine. Viscount Franz Moore and Lady Lewis and Caltese were quick to follow the woman's example by giving their names. Having given those present a smile, Angelica noted the joy of meeting them. Soon various desserts and aromatic tea were served. Having tasted the treats, the guests stylously praised their exquisite taste. Yi, having served tea to the Empress, and Irma expressed surprise at the abrupt communication with her subjects. Angelica understood her reaction, but she could not act differently. With a hint of contempt, the girl pointed out to the woman that she had not previously been concerned about her health, but now she dared to lecture her. Bowing her head, Irma tried to justify herself, but Angelica stated that her behavior said otherwise. Hastening to apologize, the woman fell to her knees before her mistress, bowing her head even lower. Angelica considered her to be a very smart woman, so the girl intended to set boundaries. Casting a tired glance around the banquet hall, the Empress dreamed of leaving as soon as possible. The hum of conversation in the banquet hall died down as leisurely footsteps approached. The atmosphere of the event changed in an instant, and everyone stared somewhere behind the Empress. The Emperor himself deigned to attend the banquet, and the guests hastened to shower him with greetings. Visibly nervous, Angelica reacted ambiguously to his arrival. Before saying anything, the man stroked his wife's head, giving her a seemingly gentle and caring look. Addressing the guests, Ranieri began with a phrase that Angelica had already voiced, which made the girl feel uneasy. With all his composure, the Emperor declared that he had come to take the Empress. Having deftly picked her up in his arms, Ranieri was about to leave. His action caused a wave of bewilderment among those present. Without hesitation, the man added that his company would be more fun for the Empress. Ranieri hastened to leave, leaving behind stunned guests and maids of honor shocked by his rudeness. Angelique was ashamed in front of everyone, but for the first time she was glad to see her reckless husband. Sometime later, Ranieri and Angelica found themselves in the Empress's palace. Angelica's retinue, represented by her faithful maids of honor, bowed upon seeing the Emperor and his wife. Ranieri calmly announced that his wife was unwell, and Sylvia intended to help accompany her. However, the man refused her, indicating that he could handle it himself. Angelica noticed to herself that the Emperor had become more lenient towards her. When they got married, getting along with Ranieri seemed to her not just difficult, but impossible. Having placed the girl on the bed, a worried Sylvia asked if she should bring some medicine. Casting a weakened glance at her, Angelica answered positively. Bowing, the girl promised to prepare them as soon as possible. Before speaking, Ranieri sat down nonchalantly on a chair next to his wife. Then, raising one eyebrow, he told the girl that it was presumptuous to appear in front of people in such a state. Feeling guilty, Angelica apologized. With a hint of mockery, the man added that she was lucky that the banquet was attended by only fools. Agreeing with him, Angelica noted that most of the subjects were not that smart. Ranieri remained silent in response, but her answer seemed to amuse him. Jumping up abruptly from her seat, Angelica remembered with horror that the Emperor had an important meeting scheduled, to which Ranieri calmly stated that he did not go there. Angelica was shocked, but the man noted that the topic of the meeting was not worth his attention. The Emperor shared that he was more interested in seeing the girl's behavior at the banquet. The girl remained silent in response, perplexed as to how the Empire still existed with such a casual attitude towards politics. Then she gently inquired about the topic of the meeting. Ranieri, without much interest, replied that the topic was the Temple of Teunius. Angelica immediately remembered that this is where the main character, Serafina, lives. The man added that he had previously received a letter from the temple. The barren lands of the Temple of Teunia were not worth the Empire's attention, but they actively acted as peacekeepers in the unspoken feud between Actilos and Soambi and Ea. Angelica clarified whether the sending of the letter was connected with the kingdom of Soambi in Aija. to which Ranieri responded negatively, explaining that the temple had requested help in exterminating demonic creatures. The man considered their request contradictory, since even their god had gifted the Tunisians with barren lands with demons at their side. Nervously, the girl asked if he was going to go there. The emperor remained silent in response and gave her an ambiguous look. But the girl knew that Ranieri would go to Tunia because he was obsessed with bloodlust. The emperor then declared that if she would prostrate herself before him, then perhaps he would show mercy to the temple. The thought that Ranieri would soon meet Serafina made Angelica nervous. The temple would send a messenger, and the girl was worried that it would be Serafina herself who would arrive as him. Taking a deep breath, Angelica tried not to get nervous ahead of time. According to the original story, Serafina should not have arrived in the empire, as her first meeting with the emperor took place in winter. However, the relationship between Angelica and Ranieri had changed, and the girl was worried that the original plot had been altered. Having fed the girl the candy, the emperor asked if she liked it. Having answered positively, Angelica politely thanked him for the treat. Although she liked the sweets, the girl thought that for a man, caring for the sick was just a game. Wung to Ranieri, she asked if he would spare her life until winter. Gently touching the girl's face, the man declared that he would do everything possible to protect her before the hunt. Time passed, but Angelica's departure from the charity banquet did not cause prejudice. The girl herself became immersed in studying information about the Tunia temple. Angelica intended to find information that was not written in the novel. Although the girl understood that Serafina would not appear at the palace, it still did not give her peace. On top of everything else, Angelica still hasn't thought out an escape plan. It is unknown how much time the Empress spent in the library searching for information. However, it seems she still managed to find at least something that could help. According to the records, Saint Tunia was the precious soul of the temple, who was forbidden to leave the temple and contact the outside world. The information she found disappointed the girl because it was not enough. According to the novel's plot, the destinies of Ranieri and the saint were linked, but there were more stories about demons than about Serafina. Angelica also learned that during the acute food shortage, the inhabitants of Tunia hunted demonic beasts and ate them. When the breeding season arrived in the lands of the demonic beasts, the grown animals, due to a lack of food, would rob people. This was called a wave. This was incomprehensible to Angelica because, as it seemed to her, the aura of the temple acted as a kind of shield. Sighing, the girl sincerely hoped that Serafina would not come, since she would not be able to leave the walls of the temple. But the girl realized with horror that if Ranieri went to exterminate the animals, he might meet the saint. In connection with this, Angelica was determined to follow her husband. She planned to run away immediately if their meeting happened. A few days later, the very day arrived, which the girl greeted gloomily. The day when she is to meet a foreign delegation, and immediately the ambassadors of the Temple of Tio. However, the emperor blocked her path, calling her by name. The man asked her why she had skipped breakfast, which Angelica replied that she was feeling unwell, although in fact she was very worried about the delegation. Then Ranieri stated that in that case it would be better for her not to attend the meeting with the ambassadors, but the girl objected and pulled him up short. Then the girl withdrew her hand in horror, realizing her mistake. Having apologized for her willfulness, Angelica informed him that she wanted to push her way into the audience as Actilos's man. Her bold statements brought a grin to Ranieri's face. However, the man agreed that, having become his wife, the girl was now truly an Actilian. Giving the emperor a sincere smile, Angelica confirmed his words. Sometime later, Ranieri, sitting on the throne, greeted the ambassadors of Tunia. The serious man politely returned the greeting, addressing the emperor as the godson of god Actila. Seeing the archbishop himself, Angelica was surprised. Among the ambassadors, the girl also noticed the Holy Knight Eden, Seraphirus Vesla the Love. The Order of the Holy Knights of the Tunia Temple Ridge was a place where the strongest warriors who opposed the demonic beasts were gathered. Although Eden was not a very significant character, he was able to rise to the top of the order thanks to his innate martial arts skills. According to the novel's plot, the young man was killed by Ranieri because of Serafina, who constantly yearned for him. Of course, Angelica considered this a rather tragic ending, but the girl decided not to panic, because Eden, as a holy knight, is obliged to accompany the highest spiritual order. Turning to the ambassadors, the self-confident emperor hinted at a bribe in exchange for his help. The agitated archbishop wanted to speak about this, but Ranieri interrupted him. With some mockery, the man asked what they could give him. Then, citing mercy, Ranieri declared that he would not accept tribute from them. Instead, the emperor ordered them to fall on their knees before him and beg for salvation. The holy knights were taken aback, as his statement was simply humiliating. Angelica assumed that something similar could happen. With all his disdain, Ranieri again ordered them to pray to him for salvation. The empress sincerely sympathized with them, but she understood that they had no choice. If they return, the temple's power alone will not be enough to deal with the wave of monsters. The girl wondered why the archbishop was hesitating. After all, at such a time the best solution was to close your eyes and bow down. Forgetting all pride, Eden took a step forward and was the first to bow before the emperor. The archbishop wanted to raise the young man from his knees so that he would not humiliate himself. However, he, like the other knights, followed Eden's example. Ranieri's face twisted into a malicious smile. He laughed at them without hesitation. Although Angelica could not object to her husband, she sincerely considered him crazy. Sometime later, the girl arrived back at the empress's palace. Lost in thought, the girl found it strange that Eden was the first to kneel. After all, the Eden described in the original was a straightforward knight with a rebellious character who would never adapt to what he considered wrong. Angelica believed that even if everyone had fallen on their faces, the young man would have remained standing with his head raised. Suddenly, the empress heard the animated conversations of her maids behind her. The girls discussed how someone had shown himself to be a skilled warrior, especially in the use of a spear. Angelica immediately realized that it seemed the Lady Sunyin waiting had already taken a closer look at the temple delegation. The temple's envoys decided to stay in the capital for 10 days, and the girl decided not to neglect them. Mustering up her courage, Angelica intended to do everything in her power. Suddenly Ranieri appeared behind her, calling out to the girl affectionately. Angelica asked why he was there, to which she received the answer that he should not have a reason to come to her. Feeling a little nervous, the girl noted that she thought the emperor was currently meeting with the archbishop, to which Ranieri stated that there was still enough time for private conversations. The girl immediately realized that he had given up the matter out of boredom. Continuing the conversation, Ranieri asked where his wife was heading, and the girl replied that she was going to make arrangements for dinner so that everyone would be comfortable. But the man told her that it no longer made sense, because he had decided everything. Approaching her closer, Ranieri noted that she now had no business, and the girl asked if she should return to the palace. The emperor agreed with this idea, but Angelica did not understand why he was pursuing her again. Ranieri called in help, but noticed that recently his wife had become too interested in the temple. We noticed how, having a band and the study of secular society that she had so diligently pursued, she began to look for information only about the temple. Moreover, the girl stated that she wanted to give an audience to the delegation, despite feeling unwell. The girl's homeland, the kingdom of Unro, was located far from the temple of Tunia, so even trade did not connect them. Remembering the knight's look, he seemed honest to Ranieri. The man recalled this with a grin. He was clearly waiting to see what would happen next. Some time later, Angelica and Ranieri were chatting over a cup of tea. The girl asked him who he had decided to seat at the table during dinner, but the man responded with a counter-question, asking whom she would seat. And Angelica shared that the archbishop, the commander of the knights, and 2 priests, seating everyone according to hierarchy. She also expressed the opinion that Ranieri would probably find such a seating arrangement boring. She added that she was seeing these people for the first time and did not understand who else was important besides them. Ranieri would have found this answer boring just 2 months ago. However, he had no desire to sit at the same table with the commander of the Holy Knights. Ranieri plopped down on a chair and made himself more comfortable. Then he gestured to Angelica, addressing her affectionately. With leisurely steps, the girl approached the man. Taking her wrist, Ranieri found it remarkable that she was so docile. Having pulled Angelique sharply towards himself, the emperor would like her to remain that way. The girl fell right onto his chest. Ranieri smiled, asking her to kiss him. From that day on, Angelica ordered Size N to keep an eye on Eden. While reporting, the girl assumed that the knight would head to the library. The empress learned that in his free time, the young man read books that were different from those carried by the temple servants. Season also reported that Eden was reading a book in secret, away from prying eyes. Angelica suggested that the book might have been banned, but she couldn't be sure. The girl wanted to test her hypothesis, but she didn't want to entrust it all to Size N. So she informed the maid that she would also skip training this time. Taking the girl by the hand, Angelica asked him to cover her, saying that she was not feeling well. Realizing that nothing could be done about it, Sizen agreed. Angelica understood that if something concerned her maid of honor, Sizen, then unnecessary talk would not reach the Emperor. On the day of training, the girl pretended to be sick, telling Irma to go with the others to watch the training. To which Irma noted that her maids did not dare to have fun while their mistress was unwell. But Angelica assured her that nothing bad would happen if she spent a couple of hours without them. The girl emphasized that Sizen's presence would be enough for her. She understood that everyone wanted to watch the training, so they shouldn't refuse. Besides, after Angelica put Duchess Irma in her place, all the maids became cautious. Smiling, the Empress asked to report to her who would win the competition. Inspired, Irma promised to personally verify the results and tell us about them, after which everyone hurried away, leaving Angelique and Sizen alone. Then the girl asked if there was anyone in the library at the moment, but Sizen only expressed concern. Touching her face, Angelica assured the maid of honor that everything would be fine. Sometime later, when the Empress approached the library, she was convinced that there really was no one nearby. She decided to go there through the guest palace where the holy knights were staying in order to run into Eden. The young man did not keep her waiting long, and soon Angelica noticed him. Looking after him, the girl was noticeably nervous. But gathering her courage, she came out of her hiding place, calling out to Eden. Angelica hastened to inform him that he most likely would not find the materials he needed. He added that there were not many books that guests were allowed to look through. Not expecting to see a girl, Eden explained that he was just looking around. Angelica asked him if he liked books, to which he received a positive answer. She found his manner of speech simple and reserved, despite such a sudden conversation. Pretending that she didn't know his name, Angelica asked him to introduce himself. Maintaining his composure, the young man calmly stated his name. Giving only his first name, Eden explained that he had no secular surname, as he had dedicated his body and soul to the god of Tunia. The girl asked about his other names, but the young man stated that, having become a knight, he burned his entire past. But Angelica clarified that she was asking about the name given to him by the one who gave birth to him. To be polite, she said that he didn't have to answer if he didn't want to. In response, Eden was silent for a while, collecting his thoughts. Angelica admitted that she had been wrong in her guesses, and then the knight gave his other name, introducing himself as Suhayan. The girl's heart began to beat faster. Her suspicions were confirmed. Deciding not to delay, Angelica asked if he had read the novel whose events they were currently experiencing. A little nervously, the young man answered positively. Then the girl asked when he had moved here, to which she received the answer that it was around May 18th. She realized with horror that their transfer had occurred on the same day. Eden expressed surprise that he was not the only one who had been transported here. Having burst into tears, Angelica did not know what to do, because all this time she thought that she was the only one like this. After apologizing, the girl told the knight that she had ordered the maid to keep an eye on him. The young man reacted to this calmly, asking the Empress her name. But Angelica asked to call her by her title, because it would be easier that way. Taking the girl by the hand, Eden expressed his joy at meeting her, as he had no idea about a person in the same position as him. Then the Empress shared that, according to the original, she was supposed to die at the very beginning. Eden spread his arms carefreely, and noted that it was now clear to him how the girl had found out his little secret, since she had simply compared it to the original. Looking around nervously, Angelica said that they should keep the dialogue short and simple. Getting straight to the point, the girl asked about the book that Eden was secretly reading with such interest, and the young man told her that he had read about forbidden magic, to which Angelica asked why he needed it. Then Eden expressed the opinion that perhaps this was the reason he came to this world. After listening to him, Angelica realized that she had never thought to approach the issue from this angle. Having read so many novels of this genre, the girl simply accepted the fact of displacement without thinking about why. Emphasizing her words about her having moved alone, Eden clarified whether the Emperor had remained the same, to which Angelica noted that it would be nice if he moved too, but the man remained the same crazy person. After receiving the answer, Eden came to the conclusion that only the two of them had been transported, being the supporting characters whose death was described in the novel, and the girl asked what he was going to do, knowing about all this. Without hesitation, the young man said that he intended to remove the magic and return to where he lived. Angelica remained silent in response, surprised by his words. After all, most people in such works about displacement do not return to their home world. Meanwhile, in the training arena, the battle between the competitors was in full swing. One of the warriors, having fallen, sat on the floor while the horse's hooves stepped on him. The man sitting on horseback was determined to win by simply trampling his opponent. The emperor watched all this from above, seated on his throne. Leaning on his arm, Ranieri looked bored. His wife's empty seat seemed to make him even more bored. Then, he rose silently from his seat, and his faithful servant responded questioningly. Wanting to leave the place, Ranieri declared that he was incredibly bored, so he decided to head straight to the Empress's palace to see his wife. Entering her chambers, he was met by a worried Size-N, who asked why he was there. Noticing her reaction, the man asked if there was a problem with his coming. Approaching Angelica's bed, Ranieri swept the blanket off with one deft movement. Not seeing the girl there, the man was shocked that his sick wife had suddenly disappeared. Becoming very nervous, she tried to explain herself, but Ranieri ordered her to shut up, angrily telling the maid that he had not allowed her to open her mouth. The emperor intended to get an explanation from his wife. He clearly remembered that the holy knight was also not in the training arena, and his wife, under the pretext of illness, left her position. The emperor was embittered by the current situation, which drove him into a rage. At the same time, the unsuspecting Angelica continued her conversation with Eden. The girl asked him if he had seen Serafina on the temple grounds, explaining that she was very nervous about the saint coming with a delegation to the emperor. The young man responded ambiguously to her question, and Angelica asked if something had happened to Serafina. But Eden, stuttering a little, hastened to point out that the girl was fine. Then, Angelica excitedly suggested that the young man had fallen in love with the saint, but he denied it. To which the empress asked if Serafina was more eccentric than in the original. With a slight hesitation, Eden explained that he didn't really know the girl, as he had avoided her in every possible way. This seemed strange to Angelica, since over time the memories of the original Eden should have been transferred to him. The young man then added that the feelings that the real Eden was experiencing were so strong that he was under their influence. Bonded in his head, there is only a distorted image, which is why he can assume that Eden hates Serafina. His words shocked Angelica, because everything was not as she thought. All this time, she assumed that Serafina and Eden had mutual feelings. Then the young man added that for Eden, norms and morals always came first. That's why he believed that it was unacceptable for a saint to have feelings for a holy knight. The girl asked if he was going on a mission to suppress demonic beasts, and the young man answered positively. Eden added that he intended to find the great library of the abandoned temple, which is located on the border dividing the lands of people and animals. Angelica agreed that they needed to find out why they were here and how to get back, so she promised to search the imperial library. And if new information is discovered, the girl noted that she will find him in the order of the Temple of Tiab. Then, Eden asked if this meant she was going on a suppression mission, to which she replied that she had planned to go from the very beginning, although she had not yet told the emperor about it, asking him not to ask about it. The young man assumed that the girl was in a difficult situation, but decided to end the conversation to avoid problems. Agreeing with him, Angelica hurried to return to the empress's palace. Walking through the corridors of the palace, the girl was glad that she managed to return alive and unharmed. Opening the door to her chambers, Angelica wanted to notify Size-N of her return, but instead she found the emperor, who immediately declared that he thought she was ill. However, the man expressed dissatisfaction with the fact that he was lied to and given a walk around the area. Visibly nervous, Angelica asked if he hadn't watched the sparring. With shaking hands, the girl explained that she went out for a walk because of a headache. Noticing her nervousness, Ranieri asked if she was afraid of something, to which the empress noted that the man had a frightening expression on his face. Her heart began to beat faster when the emperor asked if she had met that night. Hastening to justify herself, Angelica denied everything, asking if he suspected her of something. Her question seemed to catch Ranieri off guard, causing him to think. Had he become vulnerable, nervous that these two were the ones who decided not to show up for the sparring? Even if his wife had taken a liking to the man, Ranieri had no reason to be angry. After all, the Emperor of Akhtatilos is not jealous, maintaining his composure and superiority. The man believed that a person could not be jealous of an ant, and if his wife liked the knight, she could simply have fun with him. Having thought about this, Ranieri, taking a deep breath, decided that it was a trifle. Then he raised his hand over Angelica, and she recoiled a little in fear. Closing her eyes, the girl tried to convey to him that she could not lie to the emperor. Watching her reaction made the man smirk. With tears in her eyes, Angelica said that she could not allow herself to be caught. Kneeling down in front of her, Ranieri admitted that she was right. Wiping the tears from her face, the man thought that everything was written all over her face. Her absurdly weak nature could not be hidden. After which Ranieri silently embraced her, as if consoling her. Not expecting this from him, Angelica asked if he was angry. The emperor wondered if she would be afraid if he said he was angry. However, he decided to give a negative answer, hugging his wife tighter. For the first time, Ranieri managed to completely fool Angelica. In a relationship where both parties know each other poorly, a small turning point has begun to occur. When the emperor left her chambers, Angelique began to panic, realizing that at this rate she would die before escaping. She couldn't believe that a man for whom she was just prey could be angry because of her absence. The girl tried to understand the reason for such a reaction, assuming that it was because of the meeting with Eden. Angelique hoped that the emperor did not realize what she had planned, since there was no one who knew that she and Eden had been reborn. That's why the girl decided not to disappear from Ranieri's sight for a while, so as not to spoil his mood. This was as it should have been, but while walking in the garden, Angelica and the emperor encountered the knights. Among them was also Eden, trying not to show it. In the current situation, Angelica didn't understand when everything went wrong. Speaking to the knights, Ranieri noted that he did not know that they enjoyed walking in the garden. One of the knights, praising the beauty of the garden, replied that every time they saw the garden, it was as if it were the first time. Seeing Eden's reaction, Angelica was glad that he decided to pretend that they didn't know each other. Turning to her husband, the girl suggested continuing the walk. Putting his arm around her waist, Ranieri declared that it was wrong to behave so heartlessly. Surprised by such a reaction, the girl was perplexed why he suddenly decided to show tenderness. After stroking his wife's head, the emperor asked the knights if they had slept comfortably, to which he received the answer that they had spent a comfortable and peaceful night thanks to the emperor. Continuing to demonstratively touch his wife, the man asked if they enjoyed the local dishes. Well, Angelica was used to his behavior in front of the maids, but now she felt awkward. Bewildered and seeing this picture, the empress's words about her husband were different for Eden. The girl understood that now Ranieri's behavior was stranger and more frightening than usual, after which the emperor turned affectionately to Angelique. Then, he suddenly pressed his lips to hers in a kiss, as if showing everyone that this girl belonged to him. The girl was overcome with a wave of embarrassment, and the knights standing nearby were perplexed. Without breaking the kiss, the man looked intently straight into Eden's eyes. The knight involuntarily shuddered under the weight of his gaze. After breaking off the kiss, the girl asked him to stop, citing the fact that the knights also needed to go. Without thinking twice, the man calmly agreed with his wife. Turning to the knights, he noted that the empress wished to be alone with him, so it was time for them to go. As they passed each other, Ranieri looked smug, and Eden gave him an ambiguous look. When they encountered the knights, Angelica had no doubt Ranieri was looking intently at Eden. The girl wondered if the emperor knew about her meeting with the knight. Angelica was overcome with panic because she wanted not to do anything stupid. Having handed over the letter to size N, the girl asked her not to look at the contents and to give it to Eden. Having received the letter, the knight became nervous as he read the contents. In it, Angelica panicked that the emperor had guessed about the conversation between them. Scene clarified that she was ordered to receive a reply letter from him. When Angelica received the answer, she learned that Eden did not think so. Having torn up the letter, the girl was indignant, considering the knight inattentive. Watching her, Saison couldn't help but notice the strangeness in her behavior. On the day when it was decided to go to Angelica for the marriage, the girl felt sorry for her princess who cried endlessly. And Saison decided to give up on marriage and move in with her mistress, but Angelique seemed like a completely different person to her. And yet, the girl remained Angelique's maid of honor, so she intended to tell her something. Gathering her courage, Saison approached her mistress, ready to begin speaking. But Angelica interrupted her, saying that she understood what had happened. The girl noted that the girl was probably worried that her mistress had the wrong feelings for Knight Eden. Saison, startled, wanted to clarify the situation, but Angelica stated that everything was not as she thought. The girl apologized to the maid for making her doubt herself, and for the suffering she did not know the cause of. With tears in her eyes, Saison asked why her mistress didn't tell her anything else. Having started wiping away the girl's tears, Angelica tried to calm her down. Having decided to explain everything, the girl explained to the maid that she had no personal interest in Eden, adding that her interest is primarily directed towards Saint Seraphina. Angelica explained her conversation with the knight by saying that she was simply asking him about the saint. However, the empress told only half the truth, while the other half was a lie. In response, Susan expressed confusion that her mistress had not asked anyone else about the saint. And Angelica noted that she spoke to Eden because he looked like he had no friends, a person who is always alone, secretly reading forbidden books. The empress was counting on the fact that the young man did not have a sense of belonging to the temple, unlike the archbishop, and would talk about the saint without thinking. After listening to the lady, Size N, wiping away her tears, offered her apologies. Angelica added that she had no intention of betraying her husband for another man, and Ranieri, who was standing at the door, heard everything. Hearing all this, a satisfied grin appeared on the emperor's face. Ranieri had heard about his wife's close relationship with Size N. They were like sisters, so he knew she was most likely telling the truth. Jin expressed her joy that her mistress was able to adapt to the palace, becoming a respected empress. Angelica noted that it was, of course, difficult, but she felt that her husband treated her well. Maintaining a smug grin, Ranieri continued to eavesdrop. Encouraged, Susan suggested that over time her mistress would come to love this country even more. With a worried look, Angelica noted that perhaps this would be the case if she did not die on the winter hunt. Ranieri quietly laughed at her worries about hunting, because he himself had completely forgotten about it. Analyzing the conversation he overheard, the emperor wondered why his wife was interested in Serafina. In connection with this, the man became curious to look at this girl during the expedition. As night fell, the palace was illuminated by myriads of sparkling stars. Smiling at his wife, Ranieri noted that the moon was very bright today. Giving him a radiant smile, the girl agreed. Noticing her husband's good mood, Angelica thought it was something unusual. Falling down next to the girl on the bed, the emperor also noted her good mood. The girl explained this by her husband's unusual good nature. Carefully taking her curls, the man asked if she was really amused by this. And Angelica asked if this was something strange. Ranieri responded positively and said that it was strange and funny. Embarrassed, the girl remarked on her own amusement, to which the emperor agreed. For the first time, Angelica saw her husband, so pleased with the correct answer. Taking the girl by the hand, Ranieri carefully placed it on his head, as if asking her to stroke him. Then the man asked what else she liked besides his good mood. Perplexed, the girl asked why he was interested. Angelica found his behavior strange, since when had he been interested in her desires and preferences? It seemed to her that nothing mattered to him except his personal needs. Looking at his wife, Ranieri asked why she had stopped her hand. His question only convinced the girl that only his own desires were more important to him. Wakping stood up. The man asked whether his wife should love to Lois as a person from here. The girl became very uneasy from his questions. Instead of answering, Angelica asked whether he was really the godson of God Actilis, but Ranieri asked her not to deviate from the topic. Clenching her hand into a fist, the girl intended to give an answer. Pointing her finger at him, Angelica declared that she wanted to escape from the empire and live in another country. She wished she could say so, but it could end very badly. Instead, the girl replied that she wanted to go on an expedition with him to exterminate demonic beasts. Adding that this was not an answer to his question, however, he had previously asked about her desires. Angelica noted that if he allowed her to follow him, that would be the best thing. Seeing his reaction, the empress realized how strange it sounded, because such a timid person like her suddenly wanted to go to such a place. Her surprise knew no bounds when Ranieri allowed her to go. He spoke about this, looking straight into her eyes and smiling softly. It was the first time Angelica had seen such an expression on his face. As the godson of the god Actilis, Ranieri was always depicted as a devil. Such a facial expression was simply not typical of him. But now his face was so harmless and radiant, and Angelica could not resist the desire to touch the man. Looking the man in the eyes, Angelica gently asked if he liked it. To which Ranieri, without saying a word in response, only smiled at the girl. Vlad allowed herself to think that she was being led by the pretty face. However, she couldn't let that fool her. A person whose attitude depends on his mood can become dangerous at any moment. Angelica tried not to forget what had already happened between them, to remember his essence. The empress was convinced that tomorrow he would become the Ranieri she knew. The girl intended to become wiser. But, contrary to the empress's expectations, the next morning, her husband did not return to his usual state. Ranieri continued to pay attention to her. Angelica began to think someone had sprinkled him with magic powdered sugar. Bowing, the archbishop thanked the emperor for his warm welcome. Ranieri responded with a smile and said that he sighed at the thought of his upcoming meeting with them. It became obvious to Angelique that her husband intended to tease the archbishop until the very end. Bowing his head again, the man hurried to take his leave, while Ranieri glanced at his wife, ignoring him. The girl understood that this smile was a favor only for her. Putting his arm around Angelica's waist, Ranieri asked if she was bored, to which he received a negative answer. For the girl, his uncharacteristic behavior was a real downfall of the character. What is inconceivable that Ranieri Actilis would behave like the hero of a romance novel. Angelica sincerely did not understand why he became more lenient towards her. Although it was good for her that Ranieri had become friendlier, she could not take it seriously. However, back in the spring, when they got married, the emperor hated even being touched, but now he has become interested in his wife. Angelica wondered if she could escape before his interest waned. And at the same time, Ranieri, over a glass of wine, also discussed some details. After all, his empress did not give an honest answer to his question, and this was the case when he asked her about her preferences. A few days ago, when the man overheard their conversation with Size N about the saint, he had one desire: Angelica, who was always next to him with a frightened look, and the moments when the girl smiled could be counted on one hand. The girl also hardly made eye contact with the emperor, which aroused his interest. Ranieri longed to see Angelica's face lit up with a smile. He wanted to possess this girl. However, he also wouldn't mind if Angelica suddenly fell in love with him. But the emperor was amused by the thought that the girl would break down if she knew what was going on in his head. With the arrival of the next day, the empress visited the imperial library. She became completely immersed in studying the books she and Eden had talked about. Looking out the window, Angelica caught herself thinking that very soon she would be setting off on an extermination expedition. During all this time, she looked through almost all the books on magic, but there was nothing in them about people who came from another world. They were the only ones with Eden, and there were no more such cases. In this regard, the girl allowed the thought that the movement was a simple coincidence. Angelica realized that they had no choice but to visit the abandoned sanctuary's large book depository. Suddenly, behind her, the girl heard a question about the literature she had read. It turned out to be Ranieri, who noted with a smile the rapid change in his wife's tastes in books. Trying to remain calm, Angelica, hiding the truth, noted that she liked to read different books. Sitting down next to his wife, Ranieri asked if she wanted to see anything on the expedition, but the girl answered negatively. Then the emperor inquired about the saint who did not leave the temple of the mountain range. Nervously, Angelica asked why he was suddenly interested in this. She then asked if this meant that he wanted to see the saint. However, Ranieri only wanted to start a conversation that was relevant to her subject of interest. Smiling, the man decided to answer her question positively. After shouting a little, Angelica declared that this was not right, to which a perplexed Ranieri asked what the reason was for dissuading him like that. In her response, the empress referred to the unearthly beauty of Saint Seraphina. However, the emperor did not understand what the problem was, and the girl added anxiously that if His Majesty looked at the saint it would be difficult. Then, Ranieri asked with a serious expression whether she dared to limit him because of this. Rising abruptly from her seat, Angelica noted that this was not what she had meant. Nervously, the girl tried to explain her words as best she could, but the emperor interrupted her, asking whether she dared to monopolize him, to which she hastened to answer negatively. The man grinned and said he liked that approach, asking to try again. His answer left the empress stunned. Approaching her, Ranieri placed his hand on her head, asking her to say it again. Looking at him, Angelica asked him not to show interest in the saint at least until the extermination. Smiling, the emperor agreed to fulfill this request. His ego was flattered by the thought that he alone could do this. 10 days later, the expedition to exterminate the demonic beast set out. The majestic emperor rode on horseback while his wife was in the carriage. The girl was not happy about this, because she also knew how to ride a horse, and therefore intended to soon switch to a horse. The quickest route lay through the foothills of the mountain range dividing Actilos and Somebia. However, the road was unsuitable for carriages. But Angelica understood that everything was so bad for her because she would arrive in comfort. The girl took only Sylvia and Sizen as companions, and in the event of an escape, it would be better to have fewer servants. Looking at the devastated Sylvia, Angelique seemed uneasy. There were rumors that Angelica had taken the girl as a trophy, so while her rating was rising, Sylvia's reputation was falling. And even if she behaves strangely at the site of the extermination, Sylvia will not be able to tell anyone. No matter how hard she tries, no one will believe the words of a weak girl. However, Angelica did not consider the girl weak. On the contrary, she was strong in her eyes. Some time later the expedition stopped, and the knights were engaged in a heated discussion. They walked for 3 days without stopping, and the empress seemed very tired. Seeing the lady's condition, Cezanne couldn't help but feel worried. Suddenly Ranieri opened the carriage door and offered Angelica his hand so that she could get out. Taking his hand, the girl carefully descended, stepping onto the ground. She didn't understand why her husband had called her, since the camp hadn't even been set up. However, Ranieri unexpectedly asked her if she liked something beautiful, to which the girl answered positively. Then, grabbing her hand, the emperor asked her to follow him. Following him, Angelica did not notice how it became darker around, and stars appeared in the sky. The girl didn't understand when they managed to go so deep, because it seemed to her that they had walked for about 20 minutes. Speaking, Ranieri noted that people like her say that small and sparkling things are something beautiful, after which, an incredibly beautiful meadow, strewn with wondrous flowers, opened up before the girl. A little embarrassed, the emperor asked her to smile if she liked it. Angelica, with a sincere smile, was taken aback. She walked slowly across the clearing, looking at the flowers growing there. Glowing buds, incredible blue butterflies. The girl couldn't tear her eyes away. Angelica didn't believe that what was happening was real. It was as if she was in a dream. Having hugged Ranieri, the girl noticeably reduced the distance between them, which greatly surprised the man. She wanted to kiss him but hesitated, as if she doubted that it was possible. But the emperor took the initiative. Pulling his wife close, Ranieri gave her a passionate, seemingly sincere kiss. The girl reciprocated, completely relaxing in his arms. Breaking the kiss, the emperor addressed her tenderly. Then, with one sharp movement, he suddenly pushed the girl back. Angelica landed softly, right on the flower-strewn meadow, looking at her husband in bewilderment. Looking at her with a hint of love, Ranieri hovered over her, continuing to call out to her affectionately. For Angelica, all of this was comparable to fantasy, because the girl was not accustomed to such treatment from him. The girl allowed the thought that the emperor was concerned about her feelings, otherwise he would not have come here with her in order to make her smile. Looking at him, Angelica's gaze became soft, while Ranieri looked at her with some interest. Then the girl took the initiative in kissing him, surprising her husband again. Taking her curls in his hand, Ranieri asked her to tell him what else she liked, to which the girl calmly, almost quietly, replied that she liked the silence. Finding her answer boring, the emperor asked if there was anything else. Ranieri grinned when Angelica replied that in that case he knew better. Perhaps the girl was too simple a person, but it didn't seem scary to her to leave everything as it was. She didn't know what to answer his question or what to do. The man in front of her was the godson of the god of war, who accepted humans as inferior beings. And because of this man, she was on the brink of death countless times. Gathering her courage, the girl asked if this meant she was special, to which Ranieri stated that she had many questions, but Angelica insisted on an answer. Looking at her, the emperor replied that she was an unusual aunt. He added that he remembered everything, when she was worried, crying, or afraid, but he rarely saw her smile. After hearing his answer, Angelica realized why he'd brought her here. He was trying to find a reason to make her smile. As if upset, Ranieri noted that she seemed to like it, but she was smiling. On a night when there is no moon, the sky is strewn with stars that are about to pour down like night rain. The shining flower buds swayed even in the slightest breeze. Although Angelica still wandered around the palace, this was the first time she had experienced such delight. Turning to Ranieri, the girl asked how he found this place, since while they were walking, they had not come across a single such flower. To which the emperor replied that there were no such flowers along the way. They explained that flowers absorb sunlight during the day and emit it at night. Then Angelica, noting his awareness, asked with interest about the effect of these flowers. After clarifying, the girl asked about some practical function of plants, but Ranieri answered negatively. Coming closer to her, the man declared that these flowers were the most ordinary. Surprised, Angelica asked if there was another meaning to this, since, according to him, she should have liked the flowers. Ranieri grinned, answered this question in the negative. Then the girl asked why this was so, but the man noted that she was asking too many questions. The emperor turned around and intended to return, but Angelica stopped him. The girl said that if he answered her, she would give him a smile. Angelica asked if there really was no point other than the hunch that she would like the place. Looking at her, Ranieri noted that she was very smart. When the imperial expedition arrived at the site, the archbishop hastened to greet everyone. Having asked that unnecessary greetings be omitted, the emperor declared that he would feed his knights himself, asking only that they be given rooms. Angelica understood that with this statement her husband wanted to say that the temple could not be of any use to them. Although these words sounded offensive, given the current state of the temple, they really won't be able to feed so many people. It was obvious to the girl that Ranieri was acting this way knowing about the situation here. He embraced his wife. The emperor suggested that they express their gratitude by preparing a place to live for them. Angelica reflected on how it's all the same for the Actilions. You're either a predator or a prey, and weakness is a vice. This was Ranieri's credo in relation to absolutely everything. Noticing the girl's gaze, the emperor asked if everything was okay. Angelica thought that his established credo somehow excluded her. After meeting with the archbishop, the couple drove past a seemingly deserted village. Residents appeared worried and overly cautious. The girl found it strange that none of the residents came out to watch such a large procession. Suddenly, the empress realized that the people living here saw the empire as an object of fear. Sometime later, Ranieri asked Angelica if she was going to join the meeting with the commander of the Order of Saints. From the emperor's words, the girl learned that the topic of discussion would be the location of the demons and the scale of the war. Having refused, Angelica noted that it would be better to wait until lunch. Stroking her head, the man expressed that he was very sorry to hear this. Ranieri gave his wife a smile and slowly walked away. In her eyes, he had clearly changed. Angelica had no choice but to accept the fact that this cruel man liked her. However, she allowed for the possibility that after meeting Serafina, everything might change. She intended to be cautious. She didn't want to run away right now, even though she had instructed Size N to prepare money for this. While the empress was actively reasoning, someone suddenly touched her hand. It was Eden who foresaw the girl's scream and managed to close her mouth, asking her to be quiet. After apologizing, the young man noted that making noise is prohibited in the temple. Claiming that she was just looking for him, Angelica hastened to ask about Serafina's whereabouts. But Eden noted that he managed to take timely measures. It would have been a problem for him if the events of the novel had begun earlier, so Eden suggested sending the saint on a journey in order to calm the townspeople. Angelica was glad of such a plausible excuse for the saint's absence. Eden also added that the girl's return will most likely take a long time. The empress relaxed, and her eyes showed great gratitude to the young man. Then Eden asked if she had managed to find anything in the Empire's library, but Angelica answered in the negative. To this the young man stated that they had no choice but to go to the abandoned sanctuary. Angelica wasn't sure there would be anything there, but she decided not to show her skepticism. Eden also asked if she was planning to go on the expedition, to which the girl replied that she would follow the extermination, because as it seemed to her, that was what the emperor wanted. Her words left Eden stunned, and the young man was noticeably surprised. Switching to a whisper, Angelica noted that this might sound strange, but she thought His Majesty liked her. Keeping his composure, Eden replied that he had known this for a long time. Angelica jumped back from him, shocked, giving him a questioning look. Eden explained that that day in the garden, the emperor clearly demonstrated to everyone that the girl was his wife. The young man also added that this was precisely why he could not risk ending such an absurd note. Eden gave Angelica a sarcastic look and declared that she was quite slow-witted. The girl clutched the hem of her dress and shared that she was worried because it was very different from the original, which Eden expressed that he completely shared her feelings. The young man then asked if Angelica would stay here if everything deviated completely from the original and the emperor did not fall in love with Serafina. His question caught the girl off guard, and she remained silent for a while. Having started speaking, Angelica tried to answer at least something, but she was not at all sure. Having said that she might not answer, Eden noted that he had heard enough. Nervously, Angelica asked why he decided that she would stay there, but Eden reassured her, saying that he would understand if she decided to stay, because the situation here could be better for her than in their world. These words made the girl think seriously about her past life. After which Angelica noted that, despite her future choice, she intends to continue collaborating with him. Deciding that the discussion had come to an end, Eden proposed to disperse. From the conversation with Eden until the meal itself, the girl's head was filled with disturbing thoughts. She wondered whether the changed Ranieri would cherish her, or whether, upon seeing Serafina, he would be enchanted by the girl. And if she overcomes the obstacle called Saint, can Angelica be sure that she will not soon become disillusioned with the Emperor? If only she knew about all the subtleties, she would be able to answer Eden's question. After the meal, the girl arrived at the room prepared for her and her husband. The bed seemed too small to her, but everyone in the temple was alone. Suddenly, Angelica caught herself thinking that she was sorry, which surprised her greatly. Lost in her thoughts, the girl wondered if she really wanted to stay here. The Empress clearly remembered that in her home world, her life was miserable. The girl lived in poverty, and her only hobby was reading novels. She didn't even have any friends. But Angelica Unro was a princess who had received an education. She was raised with love and had a devoted friend, Essazin. The girl had no guarantee that Ranieri would always love her, so she considered it wise to leave. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, and a familiar voice was heard on the other side. Having hurried to open the door, Angelica did not even remember how she closed it. Then Ranieri entered the room, bringing with him a plate and a mug. When the girl asked about all this, the man noted with a smile that he had brought food for the Empress. The Emperor was worried that the girl had eaten little, and Angelica was pleasantly surprised. Sitting down next to his wife on the bed, Ranieri speared one piece with his fork. He then held out the treat to Angelica, intending to feed her. Having tried the dish, the girl noted its wonderful and sweet taste. Remembering tomorrow's expedition, Angelica hastened to wish Ranieri good luck. Ignoring her wishes, the Emperor asked her to concentrate on food. The girl understood that no matter how sweetly Ranieri behaved, he was still actless, and until the fear of him disappeared, she could not fully let him into her heart. After finishing their small meal, the couple sat in awkward silence for a while. Breaking the silence, Ranieri noted the tiny size of the bed, which would be cramped even for one person. To which Angelica only clarified that the bed was for one person. Touching her curls, the man gave the girl a tender look, stating that this is what he was pointing out. At that moment, Angelica's heart began to beat much faster than usual. Ranieri's hand gently slid to her lips, lifting her chin up. Coming closer to her, the Emperor intended to kiss the girl. Angelica closed her eyes and realized that her heart was about to jump out of her chest. Then, with one sharp movement, she pushed the Emperor away, refusing the kiss. Ranieri was shocked, looking questioningly at his wife. Looking into his eyes full of amazement, Angelica did not understand why he was so stunned. However, the girl could not even imagine that she would be able to reject this man's touch. Realizing the whole situation, her fear gradually grew. After all, Ranieri had never received a refusal from anyone before. In a hurry to correct the situation before he got angry, Angelica referred to the joke. Continuing to make excuses, the girl's nervousness knew no bounds. Then Ranieri addressed her kindly, maintaining a gloomy expression on his face. Endlessly apologizing, Angelica was worried that he was very angry. Bowing her head slightly, the girl referred to her mistake. But Ranieri calmly told her that he was not at all angry. The Empress could not believe his words, so the man, hugging her, only repeated what he had said. Trying to calm his wife, the Emperor hugged her, asking her not to cry, and not to be afraid of him. Angelica's heartbeat still didn't subside. She couldn't believe that he really wasn't angry. As if showing concern, the Emperor noted that this journey had been difficult for her. At that moment, Angelica seemed to relax in his arms. Having laid his wife on his lap, Ranieri suggested that she sleep and rest. After falling asleep, the girl saw a dream in which a mysterious girl appeared to her, asking her to take a tray. Having accepted the tray, a puzzled Angelica asked her who she was. But the mysterious lady asked to lift the lid and see what was inside. Lifting the lid, Angelica saw a drop of someone's hair. Frightened, the girl threw the tray away, and someone's head rolled across the floor, rolling to the feet of a man standing nearby. The man turned out to be Ranieri, who immediately burst into a sinister laugh. Noticing him, Angelica froze in fear, staring at him. Suddenly, the head lying on the floor spoke to her, asking if she would stay there. Looking closer, Angelica noticed that it was Eden's head. Feeling fear, the girl stepped back, cutting into the mysterious lady. Turning to the lady, the Empress recognized her as Saint Serafina. Stepping back from her, the girl bumped into Ranieri standing behind her. With a smug grin, the man addressed her affectionately, calling her his winner prey. Then Angelica fell to the floor, wondering why Ranieri and Serafina were together. Serafina, turning to the girl, tried to say something. But for Angelica everything was like a fog, and she didn't understand what she was trying to say. The girl's eyes widened, and she was pulled out of this nightmare when she heard someone calling her insistently. Asking her to come to her senses, Ranieri looked as if he was witnessing real horror. Having finally woken up, Angelica screamed, trying to come to her senses. Ranieri towered over her, his hands gripping her wrists in a death grip. Reflecting on the nightmare, Angelique found it strange that in her dream she was furiously walking towards death, although she was terribly afraid of it. The morning dawned, illuminating the Tunia temple with a pleasant sunlight, and the birds singing in the surrounding area brought peace. Looking at herself in the mirror, the Empress saw a choking mark on her neck, realizing why her husband was tightly squeezing her wrists. She was grateful for Ranieri's intervention, otherwise the trail would have been more monstrous. Clenching her fist, the Empress remembered that today was the day they would go to the sanctuary. The girl intended to prepare properly and forget about the nightmare. Showing politeness, the Archbishop asked Angelica if she had slept well. Having answered positively, the girl asked a similar question, to which the man noted that thanks to Actila's godson, everything had become better. Then Angelica asked where they were going to start today, and the Archbishop replied, from the northwest. He announced that within a day they should arrive at an old sanctuary, teeming with demons, located close to the outskirts. Then the girl merely stated the fact of their intention to recapture this territory. Encouraged, the Archbishop emphasized that the return of the territories would boost morale, adding that this is the intention of the most honest among the holy knights. For Angelica, these words sounded funny, because she knew about Edan's hidden motives. The Emperor approached them and called out to his wife. The man asked if the girl could go with them. Angelica understood that this question was because of what happened last night, and she was really tired. But the sanctuary troubled her no less, and the Empress wondered whether it was worth staying. Turning to the Archbishop, the girl asked how long the journey there and back would take, to which she received the answer that it would take about 2 weeks. It seemed that this answer did not quite satisfy her, since she would get there in a day and did not want to wait long. After thinking about it, she came to the conclusion that this was an opportunity to explore without Ranieri's supervision. After the sanctuary, the punitive detachment will move even further to suppress the beasts. And if she had visited the sanctuary all this time, Angelica would have been able to learn much more than Eden. Therefore, she informed her husband that she would stay and rest, wishing him a good journey. Citing fatigue after the journey, the Empress said that she could interfere. Then Ranieri asked if she really thought that because of her, he would be tied hand and foot. But the girl was quick to explain that she simply didn't want the attack to be delayed, adjusting to her pace. Taking his hand, Angelica added that she would wait for his return, so that she could quickly return to their home, the Empire of Ikadelos. Hearing this, Ranieri seemed pleasantly surprised by her words. Turning around, the man promised her to return as soon as possible. Waving her hand after him, Angelica relaxed, hoping that this would be better. The girl approached the Archbishop and asked if she could visit the sanctuary after its liberation. The man was surprised, and she hastened to add that she was simply interested in the God of Mercy. Inspired, the Empress noted that the visit to the sanctuary would be a significant event. Sometime later, the suppression squad moved to the scene of the clash. Looking angrily at the Actyleons, one of the holy knights called them monsters. The man boldly noted their thirst for battle and bloodthirstiness, and he felt this thirst even when he was a little further away from them. Looking at the Emperor, Eden noticed his gloomy expression. It was surprising to him how dependent Ranieri's mood was on Angelica. The young man could not believe that the girl had tamed the man so much that she could go against his will. After all, now he was like a different person, different from the description in the novel. Eden suggested that the narrative in novels tends to exaggerate only one side. Suddenly, the squad stopped, hearing the terrifying roar of the monsters. Without a moment's hesitation, Ranieri rushed forward, straight towards the monsters. The inspired Actylean watched his emperor with delight. A short time later, several bodies of monsters lay at Ranieri's feet. It was then that Eden saw that very book Emperor Ranieri. Completely bloodthirsty and thirsty for battle, he rushed alone and without hesitation to fight the monsters. Suddenly, one of the monsters showed signs of life, trying to rise from the ground. Noticing this, Eden took a defensive stance and was ready to fight. The young man thought that Ranieri had made a mistake, but quickly changed his mind. Raising his sword up, the Emperor pointed it at the monsters, giving a command to his warriors, and they rushed into battle, following the example of their ruler. Some of the Actyleons were on horseback, trampling the surviving monsters. Horrified, Eden was shocked that Ranieri had left them alive for this. Watching this, the young man realized that the more Angelica moved away, the more something awake and inside the Emperor. As they approached the old sanctuary, the squad noticed that the entire area was strewn with monster eggs. One of the Actylion sighed nervously and reported this. Hearing this, Ranieri understood why the monsters were so close. The Holy Knights were offended that such a sacred place had been desecrated by demons. The Emperor then asked them if they had ever witnessed the birth of a demonic beast. The stunned knights wavered and answered in the negative. The Emperor grinned and promised that they would see it today. A fierce battle with demons broke out on the territory of the old sanctuary. Ranieri ordered the hatched babies to be killed, leaving the eggs in their mothers. The squad suffered some losses, and one of the knights ordered the bodies of the dead to be moved to one place. Eden was horrified by what was happening. It seemed like he was about to vomit. The young man considered Emperor Actylus to be a definitely crazy man. In this hellish massacre, not only did Ranieri not feel fear, he also had fun. One of the knights asked the Emperor why he decided to let the cubs hatch instead of getting rid of them, to which the man stated that it was boring. The Actylion ran up and hurriedly reported that the egg had hatched, and Ranieri only asked if he hadn't killed it. By answering negatively, the agitated man indicated that the hatched cub did not attack. He didn't want to sound presumptuous, but he expressed the opinion that the monster recognized them as its mother. Putting on a smug grin, Ranieri declared that it was finally fun, ordering others to keep watch over the other eggs. However, the Actylion was concerned about being recognized as parents, and the cubs needed to be fed. But the Emperor only sarcastically emphasized the fact that the newborn monsters were incredibly hungry. He then gave an order regarding the newborn animals, which sent a chill down the Actylion's spine. Tension showed on Eden's face. The young man wondered who else was this devilish beast. As night fell, in accordance with the Emperor's order, the guard was posted. Eden was one of the people on duty, and the whole scene disgusted him. However, this position allowed him to see things that were not available in his home world. Not noticing any cracked shells on any of the eggs, the young man assumed that no hatching would occur anytime soon. Turning towards the exit, Eden intended to slip away for a moment and explore the surroundings. His wanderings led him to a place that looked like a large book depository. Looking around, Eden noticed that the room was much smaller and poorer than expected. Having reached the end of the room, the young man discovered a strange stone door, slightly open. Peering through the crack in the door, Eden realized that the passage was too narrow and he wouldn't be able to squeeze through. The knight noticed that there was something written on the door handle. The cryptic inscription stated that when Actyla's blood was ready, Tunia's sword would open the passage. Reflecting on his discovery, the young man guessed what blood of Actyla meant. After all, most likely they were talking about the blood of god Actyla's godson, Ranieri Actylus. However, Eden didn't know what the sword of Tunia was, as such a relic didn't exist. The young man intended to search the vault for documents about it. He was pulled out of his thoughts by an Actylion standing behind him, who loudly called out to the knight. The man urged Eden to return to his post, as the cubs were about to hatch. Turning towards him, the young man was ready to go, but the Actylion asked what he was looking at on the empty wall. With a start, Eden turned to where the door had been, but to his surprise, the wall was indeed empty. Intending to return quickly, the Actylion asked the young man to follow him, so as not to miss the birth of the animals. Following after him, Eden couldn't get the empty wall out of his head, where the door was definitely located. On the second day after the punitive detachment left, news arrived that the sanctuary had been recaptured faster than expected. Angelica and her ladies, waiting actively cared for the wounded soldiers. The girl hurried to the infirmary, having learned that the wounded knights had returned first, afraid to see Eden among them. Having made sure that the young man was not there, the Empress was puzzled as to why the knights' wounds looked so terrible. Curious, the girl asked if their expedition had been difficult, but the man answered in the negative. The knight revealed that he was not entirely satisfied with Actylus's strategy, despite the fact that the target was demons. Confused about what he was talking about, Angelica asked for details, and the man, clasping his hands, began to speak. He told that Actyla's godson took away the eggs laid by the demons, and after hatching, the cubs mistook them for their parents. They had no choice but to feed the cubs to their mothers. His story shocked Angelica. She didn't know how to react to it. Then, the girl heard the bottles of medicine fall to the floor with a loud clang. A nervous Sylvia, hastily apologizing, began to pick everything up. The girl was shaking violently, and even from behind it was clear that shock was on her face. Noticing Sylvia's reaction, Angelique ordered Size N to keep an eye on the infirmary. The Empress intended to leave and bring food for the knights, calling Sylvia to follow her. After leaving the infirmary, The girls walked slowly along the temple corridor without saying a word. Angelica hoped that this would make Sylvia feel better, since, as an Actilian, she could not ask for rest. Turning to her mistress, the girl asked why she cared about her. With a trembling voice, Sylvia declared that as the daughter of traitors and the Empress's trophy, she did not deserve this. Raising her eyebrows in concern, Angelica asked if she wanted to be treated anyhow. In addition, he asked if Sylvia hated her, since she was the reason for the collapse of her family. Having answered negatively, the girl stated that in order to hate Her Majesty, one should start with oneself. Sylvia noted that she clearly remembers how she killed her mother with her own hands. How mercilessly she raised the hand that held the stone over her mother, making several strong blows. The girl thought she had put it aside, but hearing about the animals made her feel uneasy. Seeing how difficult it was for Sylvia, Angelica, trying to calm her down, put her hand on her shoulder, asking her not to talk anymore. Having fallen silent, the maid of honor became very nervous, trying to catch her breath. Unable to bear the burden of her experiences, the girl threw herself into the Empress's arms. Seeing Sylvia roaring at the top of her lungs, Angelica suddenly understood her, realizing that the girl had been holding back until now. Looking at her like a loving mother, the girl wondered if this meant that Sylvia, having shown her weakness, had finally trusted her,